Test, test. I'm not hearing anything in the sound system. Test, test, test. So we might just have to. Let's just do like a test meeting or something. Or test, test. Test, test. Should be that. Test, test, test. Oh yeah, I can see it moving, so it should be working. Test, test, test. Yeah, it's coming from here. So okay, I think it's working. Yeah, just do that.
Thanks, Scott. At Silga, we had a discussion around how I shouldn't introduce this next meeting, and we were talking about being the alphabet people. But I decided I'd just talk about the alphabet people instead of introducing the area directors as alphabet people. So anyway, I call this meeting to order. And the TNRD acknowledges that we connect with many First Nations communities across our vast regional district. And today we are located in the Tecumseh, the Secwepemc territory, situated with the unceded territory ancestral lands of the Secwepemc Nation. The TNRD appreciates the partnership that we have with Tecumseh, the Secwepemc, and respect the territory and land on which we gather today. Okay. Any additions or deletions to the agenda? Okay. So we need a motion for the March 9th minutes. Yep. Okay, good. So it's do I need to call out the names or did you get them?
We have them. Thank you.
What, I beg your pardon? Yeah. They have them? Oh, good. Okay. Any errors or omissions? All in favor? Motion's carried. So now we get into reports. We get a community services update, and it's a verbal presentation from member. I just couldn't remember. Is it Susan here first? Sherry. Sherry, that's right. And Joe, thank you.
Hello? Hello?
Check. 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 There you go.
Thanks, Jamie. Good morning.
There we go.
I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce myself to those of you who may not have met me because I do work out of the Clearwater office. I'm Sherry Madden. I am a community services coordinator, and many of you have met Joe Kang, who is also a community services coordinator working out of the main Kamloops office. So today we would just like to give you a presentation about what the two of us undertake within our workload to give you an idea of what it is that we might be doing within your electoral area. So we thought the first thing that we would cover off is the grand openings that we have arranged for 2023 for those capital projects which were completed last year. So we did on Family Day this year with Director Sao in Vavenby, unfortunately minus ice, but plus snow. So it wasn't a very productive year in terms of usage of the rink. I think they managed to skate on it for about 5 days. The weather just didn't cooperate this year, but we did do a full replacement of the Vavenby outdoor rink this year. And that was funded through a combination of taxation and Canada Community Building Funds. We completed it and came in around $173,000 or $200,000 and opened on February the 20th.
Yes, good morning, everyone. As Sherry mentioned, my name is Joe Kang. I am the second services coordinator here. I've been in this role now about 2 years. So just heading into the grand openings, this was actually one of my first projects I hopped on and started when I got hired in 2021. And it was in Area O, in Little Fort. It's the Electoral Park. So this project actually was a combination of both CCBF funding and generous donation from Trans Mountain. So it was a total of 230,000, 80,000 from Trans Mountain and 150 from the CCBF. The Little Fort residents were able to get a new playground, a picnic shelter, outdoor washroom facility, a new sign to the Little Fort Community Hall. And also we did some landscaping, and we were able to move the fencing back at the baseball diamond because I guess it didn't really meet regulations. So that was also fixed as well. And we are planning a actual official grand opening on Saturday, June 24th at 11 a.m. And this is an open invite to all. So please do join myself, Area O Director Jill Hayward, and I got to give a shout out to the past director, Bill Kershaw. He had a lot to do with this project as well. He was very involved, and it was just nice to see once it all came to fruition and out there now, and people are enjoying it. So yeah, June 24th will be that grand opening.
Moving on to the Blue River Pedestrian Bridge, which we completed in December of 2022. It was a project that was started under Director McDonald, then went through Director Quinn and completed with Director Lee Onslow. So it was a bit of an albatross. It faced some significant hurdles, but now that it's completed, we are intending to do a grand opening in August. And the project came in at $233,666. Go down to the next one.
Yeah. Yes, sorry, just heading into the next phase, we're going to talk about some capital projects we're working on in 2023, 2024, / even 2025. We're looking ahead here. So I think, yeah, sure.
So again, back to Area B at Eleanor Lake Park. We have had some breakage, as you can see at the end of the jetty on the left-hand side picture. And so we've been trying to remediate this for the past number of years, had difficulty getting our approvals. And then when our quotes came in, they were far above what was logistically and publicly probably responsible to spend to fix it. So this year, what we're doing is we're going to be actually removing that rock and sand jetty, and we'll be reinstalling more docking that will take it right up to the beach. So we're going to get that project completed in the fall of 2023. Still in Area B with Director Onslow, we will be reinstalling Welcome to Blue River and putting in new Avola signage. We will be removing the existing structures for the Blue River signage, as one of them has fallen down and the other one is deteriorated. And this project will be completed in the 2023 budget year. Vavenby Park, Director Sao, this is in his area. This is landscaping, which we undertook in 2015 or 2016 with an intention to irrigate at that time. But then due to COVID and some supplies, as well as budget, we were unable to complete it. So we will be looking to get that irrigation installed in the fall of 2023. And then that will enable us to maintain the plantings that have been put on site. And as well, that site, Vavenby, is quite dry. So it will be quite nice to be able to provide them with a continual grassy area over the summer. So in the spring, it looks wonderful. And in the summer, it turns into a bit more of a barren field. So we're looking forward to being able to provide a more usable area for our area residents. The TNRD regional entrance sign project is a project of the board. It's gone through a couple of reports to the board and now is ready to be moved forward. There are 5 locations chosen within the regional district at this point in time where you enter the regional district on main highways. And there is $63,000 allocated to this project for this year. So we'll be moving forward with the permitting required from highways, as we will be building them on highways right of way. And then we'll move into the actual implementation phase.
Yeah, so just moving on, kind of just jumps on with our Electoral Park thing. But with the Little Fort Community Hall, we're actually doing a generator project, and this project actually is a part of the Trans Mountain funding. So we'd put aside $90,000 to install a generator in the community hall, which would not only benefit the fire department, but the community in general, just in emergencies and all that. So where we're standing at this project, Jason Tomlin, the manager of fire protection, was kind of looking into it at first, and we had gone and done an actual RFP and everything, and the prices were ridiculous. Like the companies came in like almost triple what I thought the cost would be. So what we did is now we split it up. So we purchased a generator by ourselves, and then we're gonna get it installed by a contractor, and the costs have come down and obviously within budget. So the generator is ordered by Total Power, and it's expected hopefully November 2023 arrival. But just with anything, there's been many delays with their goods, especially. So that's I mean, it's nothing that the public will see, but it's an exciting thing to have at the community hall and be very useful. And hopping on to area M and N, this has kind of been my baby project since I joined the TNRD. This is one of my first projects I jumped onto, and it was up at Smith Pioneer Park in Lower Nicola. We are doing an enhancement project. This project is fully funded through CCBF funding, split between Director Laird and Director Graham. This project is almost close to $700,000 potentially. There's been quite a few changes that already happened. As you see in the photo, we had a new picnic shelter installed there with there will be picnic tables. Last year, we also got removal of the old backstops. We relocated a bunch of equipment. We had new fall surfacing installed in the playground. A new post and rail fence was installed to divide the playground and the parking lot. Pickleball lines were designed on existing tennis courts so people can enjoy both tennis and pickleball courts. And obviously the big thing last year was the covered picnic shelter that we got done end of summer, early fall. And just so heading into this year, one of the things we really wanted to get going and hopefully up before the famous Garlic Fest was our band shell. So we were working with our contractors all through winter, getting the right permits, contracts and everything. And we officially broke ground last month, and we are in the stages of concrete's been poured and everything, and we're actually going to be framing next week. So it's very exciting. The community is very excited for this, and this is going to be a full electrical band shell. It's going to be, anybody can go on there, and again, we hope to have it completed by end of June 2023. And just hopping on to the next thing, I'm gonna pass it on to Sherry. I guess we'll talk about our general operations of what we do in everyday lives of not just projects and just the stuff we look at every day.
It's all about you.
Oh, it is me still. Yeah. So we do look after 3 regional parks throughout the TNRD. So regional parks that's the whole region pays into. So one park we have is the Barrier Forks Regional Park out in Barrier. We actually have an agreement with the Barrier Outdoor Rec Society. They maintain the trails on our behalf. Many of you may know, what's his name? Carmen Smith. He's very involved with us, and he helps us with grading the trails and everything. We also look after Low Hells Gate and the South Thompson Boy System, which in the next slide. Yeah, so I got questions, people asking, why is the Boy System a regional park? But it is technically it is a park, but it is a service that it affects the whole region on the South Thompson. We actually have an image map here that Olivia's gonna pull up. Olivia, are you able to zoom out? Just keep going, I think. Oh, does it? Okay. Are you able to drag the map up? Like down, sorry. Okay. Anyways, so we have we can share that link after, but it's an interactive map of where all our boys sit on the South Thompson. It starts out at the Kamloops Lake and goes all the way out to the shoe swap. I've been looking after the system now for 2 years, and I've actually ridden the whole, or gone on a jet ski and done the whole system there. And we're very grateful. We have a contractor that's very passionate about it, and he's been looking after it for many years now. I know last year we had a little bit of trouble with just supply issues with boys and all that, and we had people reaching out just with safety concerns, and unfortunately it wasn't anything it was out of our hands with getting the supplies of the boys, but this season we're looking pretty good. And I think our contractor was out already once and things are where they're supposed to be for now. And so this is an ongoing thing. He goes out once a week in peak season, sometimes even two. Olivia, did you want to go back to the? Yeah, I mean, we're almost done here, so we're gonna have a question period if that's okay, Director Morris.
Slide 17. Oh, it's locked up.
Oh.
Oh, there we go. See if it'll work.
Yeah, so myself and Sherry also look after the daily or the operations of 3 cemeteries in the TNRD, the Avola Cemetery, the Blue River Cemetery, and the Little Fort Cemetery. I know there's plans with Sherry with expansion of the cemetery. When I signed up for this job, I didn't know I would be dealing with with all this paperwork from funeral halls and stuff. But so it's been very learning about the system and how much legal stuff goes into burying someone is it's been not fun, but I know how to bury someone now. So. Yeah, a little bit of paperwork, yeah. And so we also have some street lighting service areas that we look after. So first off, we have a critical street lighting bylaw that affects about, I think we have 8 now. Eight areas now that have critical street lightings. And so with the critical street lighting, it depends on what area, and the whole area pays into it. And we have guidelines in our bylaw to determine what falls into a critical street light. We actually have service areas for street lighting in Avola, Blackpool, Coldwater, Pritchard, Vavenby, and Whitecroft. So a lot of the critical locations, I know Hydro, we've dealt with some of the directors. Hydro had come back to us saying that the Ministry of Transportation was wanting to ditch those lights because they didn't deem them safe, but we did find use for them. So we did take them over to our critical locations because they were at intersections or mailboxes and stuff. So that's kind of where our critical locations fall under.
So Joe and I also look after 3 community halls in the North Thompson area. The Avola Schoolhouse is in Area B. Little Fort Community Hall, which Joe referenced earlier, is in Area O, and the Vavenby Community Hall is in Area A. So we look after ensuring that the halls are maintained, as well as handling bookings. But for the Little Fort Community Hall, there is an agreement with the Little Fort Recreation Society to deal with some of the maintenance and the booking issues on that facility. And the facilities are all fairly well utilized. And especially coming out of COVID, because of course, during COVID, there was basically nothing going on at our community halls, but we are starting to see residents wanting to organize more events at their community halls and to generate more community involvement. So that's really nice to see. We do have a number of community parks located through a variety of our electoral areas. Joe looks after the Agate Bay Boat Launch, which is on Adams Lake, includes a small porta potty, garbage disposal, and of course the beautiful boat launch there. The Blue River Community Park would be one of the jewels, I would say. It's in Director Onslow's area. We have a beach house, an extensive dock system with swim docks and a slide dock. We have a sand volleyball court, ball diamond, concession in the beach house, amazing washrooms, much nicer than my house actually. We have a beautiful playground that was replaced in, I think it was 2017. And this facility is extremely well used in the summertime and very popular with tour buses as a stop, if nothing else, to use our washroom facility because it is amazing. We've developed a Blue River Trail system, which we've just received $140,000 destination development grant to do some work on as well. So that project will be underway here shortly. In Area A, we have the Birch Island Community Park, the Ferry Road Park, the Vavenby Park, 2 parks in Vavenby actually. They all have some sort of playground structure. We've put picnic shelters into many of our parks. In Avola, we have Diamond Drive. We have Keekwillie out in area P, I do believe. L, sorry, not very good at the other electoral areas. I apologize. Monty Lake,
L.
L. It's Joe, help. Pritchard Beach, Smith Pioneer Park, which Joe has already indicated is getting a lot of improvements at this time. So we do look after a lot of these parks, and we do have maintenance contracts in place for them, and then look after the capital improvements. The Blue River Trail System that I just previously referenced, we've done a lot of work to get these under legal agreements so that we can market them from a tourism and economic driver perspective, as well as by having legal agreements in place, we are able to obtain grants such as the Destination Development Grant. If we did not have agreements through license of occupation and a Trails Partnership Agreement, we would have been ineligible for that funding. So we also have a Blue River Trails Master Plan that was passed by the board in 2021. Those things are the kind of things that make these projects possible when we're going after grant funding to implement them. I look after Blue River Tourism Marketing under Economic Development. So we have a very small budget. It's only about $45,000 that actually goes towards the marketing activities. But we do have a very active social media presence as well as a website, and we produce a number of brochures. And we also interact with the North Thompson Valley Marketing Committee, which is a group of North Thompson Valley tourism destination marketing organizations. So we get more exposure through that as well. So that works for Area P, Area O, Area B, and Area A are all part of the Blue River North Thompson Valley participation. Area B is the only electoral area which still has radio rebroadcasting service. We do have some difficulty getting it to be consistent because we're delivering it via satellite internet and then through agreements with Jim Pattison Group and Radio NL here in Kamloops. But the bonus to the situation is that they're delivering the service for free. They will come out maintained for free. We are just paying for the internet service. But of course, not everything is for free. So that means when Jim Pattison has to service their sites, their priority, not our site. So that's led to some of the issues that we've had, and we're working on trying to find a resolution to better delivery of that service as we move forward.
Emergency Operations Center support. It's a funny story. I remember when I started my first day, I'd walked up the stairs at the TNRD building, and Mr. Ron Story was still here, and he was waiting, and he was like, "Hey, just follow me." And so I started walking towards the boardroom, and I was like, "Oh, maybe he's giving me a tour or whatever." We come over here, literally on that seat. He's just like, "I have a seat," and I was like, "Oh, okay. Like, do I have an office?" He's like, "Well, this is going to be your office for the next 2 months." In the emergency operation. It was amidst of the 2021 wildfires. So myself and Sherry have been involved in leadership roles in the EOC for the last two years. Sherry, even before that, she has wildfire experience. So that plays a key role in helping be key players in the EOC. I'm just been very thankful that, you know, Kevin, Jamie, Scott have allowed me to take JIBC courses to better and further my knowledge in emergency operations. So when the time comes, I'm able to step in and help in logistics, operations, and just what needs to be done gets done. So services coordinators, we take on supporting roles in other EOCs as well. Sherry was actually out at Cache Creek for a little stint 2 weeks ago, and was able to go there and kind of help them out during a time of crisis. And we also, during the EOC, do a lot of field work to support what's the EOC itself. Like you can find me on the road sometimes going out and taking pictures of log jams or taking pictures of flooded properties. So this is all part of our role. And I personally enjoyed a lot. It's kind of become my passion of the EOC. And I think we just have a really good team in our EOC. Our EOCs ran very, very good compared to other EOCs that I haven't been part of, but I've seen. So I'm very thankful the relationships I've been able to build and helping people. And even though it's not fun when it's happening, I enjoy the outcome of being able to help people and get them out of harm's way. So that's also a big part of our role in the summers and during freshet. So that is the end of our presentation. So any questions for us?
Lee, did you have a question? You had a question you wanted to ask?
A really pretty easy question. So the South Thompson, you said that buoy system is TNRD as a contract managed and right from Kamloops Lake all the way to right to the Chase?
Yeah,
Is that right? And is that Mr. Philpott?
it is. Yeah, Mr. Andy Philpott.
Good,
Yeah.
we talk off, hit the bridge quite often.
Oh, okay.
So I keep an eye on it myself as well. It's good to see that the buoys are actually floating now as opposed to laying down flat on the gravel. So that's that was good. The only other one then in terms of Pritchard Beach is a separate conversation, but opportunities over the longer term. It's a classic example of a very difficult situation. So that one, I think even from a prototype thing, I think we've done some really good things, but I think we also have some gaps that we're still trying to resolve. Any of the others that have these public parks that are limited in terms of the management, but you have been really supportive, which is very helpful. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. And again, Pritchard Beach, Mr. Vieira and Mr. Skrapnik have been in contact with the provincial government, trying to set something up. It's unfortunately it is dealing with the provincial government. It is a lengthy process, but we understand the issues. We hear it from the residents and we definitely are looking for a long-term solution there. So.
Yeah, and I think that's just one, given the density of population,
Yeah.
as dense as it may be. I think, yeah, that'll be one for us all to work on together, for sure. Thanks.
Director Hooton?
Thank you. Joe, Keek Willie Park, I know when I had my orientation meeting with Jamie and Scott, it's a little park on the riverside of Del Oro that we basically cut the grass, I understand, and that's about all we do. So Director Newstater from the City Council lives there, and I've asked Katie to, maybe we'll have a meet and greet session at the park one day with the area residents and see if there's any improvements that they would like to see done. Benches, tables, whatever, and maybe spruce that up a little bit and maybe make it. And when we have that meeting, I'll make sure and invite you and we can just have a neighborhood chat and see where we're gonna go. And then Monty Lake Park, I know Scott said that we have an access problem, I believe, for the boat launch or something to that effect. And I've tried one contact with Talco, but I'll try another one and see if we can get that one looked after. And Director Morris and I were out the other day and talking about the Pritchard Beach. So see if we can go get that one rectified.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, especially at Kokili Park, it's a nice piece of property. It's beautiful opportunities if the community chooses so. And yeah, we can always look at future steps. But and then yeah, Monty Lake again, Scott's correct. It's a bigger issue and it's a political issue and trying to get that. But we're ready. We want to see something more permanent there as well, Mr. Vieira and Mr. Skrapnik. So that's our goal and we're ready to do it when it's able to.
I have a question on the economic development funding. Where does that come from for the North Thompson? Is that generated through the area directors or is it a tax that's paid for by the communities?
We have Electoral Area B Economic Development and Tourism Service Area. So the entire Area B population pays to the funding that goes for the tourism marketing. Is that what you're referring to specifically?
Just wondering how it was financed, that's all.
Yeah, through the service area.
Thank you. Any other questions from anybody else? Just one question on the highway signage. How are you making out with highways to getting your permits? Any movement?
We haven't submitted the applications as of yet, but I do have contacts from previous work that I've done within the highways right of ways. So we'll be moving that project forward here shortly.
Thank you. Dr. Smith.
Can you let us know what the 5 locations are where they're going or?
Do my best to remember. Jamie might have to help me. There will be one north of Blue River on Highway 5 at Alberta. There will be one. west of Spence's Bridge along the Highway 1 corridor. There will be one out on the Little Shoe Swap as we exit east on Highway 1.
One on 97 north of or east of Westwald. And where was the fifth one?
Jamie and I did a drive last year to pick the sites. We just
Oh,
can't
the
remember.
fifth one was north of at 70 Mile coming in from the
Right.
Caribou.
We don't have one on the Coquihalla. I can't remember the discussion around there. I don't think it was possible.
Yeah, there was restrictions on being able to erect those on the Coquihalla. So that's why both the Coquihalla and the Coquihalla connector are not on the books.
Director Hogan?
Just, would there be one on the old 5A by Aspen Grove country coming in? Isn't that where the dividing line is between DNRD and Smokey?
There is a dividing line there, but no, we don't have one planned for that location. This was, and we went through this with the previous EA director committee. It's a challenge because there's, I think there was 12 fairly major access points. So we kind of had to spread them around and pick which ones made the most sense, which ones would be kind of good sight lines and had the most traffic coming in.
Director Manning, you had a question? Thanks very much for the update. That was good to hear and see. And looking forward to getting the projects done. It's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, item 5.2, Emergency Operations Center update and then flood response.
All right, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me all right? We're all good, okay. All right, we wanted to give you an update on what's happening in the Emergency Operations Center this spring. I'll kind of lead us through the presentation, but at any time, Kevin will probably jump in and correct me or add to the discussion as we go. And this could be an open discussion, so if you want to stop and ask questions, if it's all right with you, Chair, that's fine with me. So where are we at? April 29th, we activated our Emergency Operations Center due to the Lost Valley wildfire near Pressy Lake. And we have had the EOC activated since that time. We quickly shifted to spring freshet response on May 2nd with the flooding of Cache Creek and Back Valley Road. And as kind of the wildfire risk reduced and the spring freshet risk increased. So impacted communities to date, unfortunately, we already have a fairly long list of communities that have been impacted. So properties along Back Valley Road, which is just outside of Cache Creek in Electoral Area I, impact to properties around Westwald from flooding of the Salmon River. 16 Mile and Highway 99, so just north of Cache Creek, there was some localized properties impacted there. Lower Nicola, there wasn't any significant damage, but we were in preparation for the potential of flooding in the community of Lower Nicola from Gishon Creek. Village of Cache Creek obviously was significantly impacted. And I have some photos coming up in the presentation here. Sun Peaks was impacted last weekend. When was it? On Sunday, as this heat wave hit, and they had rapid snow melt that was causing issues with their sewer treatment plant and potential impact to the road. The road was down to single alternating traffic for a few days. And as I mentioned, Pressy Lake in Area E was impacted early on with the wildfire. So in Lower Nicola, this is just one of the photos taken from our drone. This is a tiger dam that we erected, or that BC Wildfire assisted us in erecting to protect that community from the potential of flooding of Gishon Creek. So many of you know Gishon Creek had major flooding events both in 2017 and 2018 that caused extensive damage in the community. Westwald, so this is one of the properties on the Salmon River that was obviously directly impacted. You see the kind of the pole barn hanging into the river there. I'll speak more to this in a few minutes. Back Valley Road, I was just out there on Tuesday touring the impacted properties there. This is Cache Creek that is normally quite a small little trickle through the forest, and since flooding in 2017 and 2018 and now this year, there's been major erosion and damage to the properties along that corridor. And this is just a little bit down the hill from where that other photo was taken. So this was when the flooding basically hit its peak in Cache Creek about 2 weeks ago. So the water you see flowing here and where those sandbags are, that's over top of a road, and underneath that, about probably 7 feet down, is where the culverts are and where the creek usually runs. So what happened here is all the sediment load coming down the creek blocked all the culverts, which is a series of actually 3 culverts going through the town, and then the water jumped up and was flooding directly over all the roadways through. So at the back of that photo there is their fire hall, and this was just after their sandbag wall on the fire hall side breached. And the reason their fire hall doors are now open was because the water was flowing right through the fire hall and out the back, and they didn't want to leave them closed, otherwise it would just crumple the doors. So it was tragic situation, a lot of damage there. So that's kind of just a snapshot of what's been happening in the region. And I'm sure many of you are aware, watching local news. So what have we been doing here in the EOC? What we want to try to do is give you a bit of a sense of what it means when we're activated, what we're doing. And I'll use this spring as an example of what activities we've been doing. So the first key thing that our role is within as a local government is issue evacuation alerts and evacuation orders. So to clarify, an evacuation alert is really just the public notification and warning system. So it means that we're communicating that out, and people, when they hear they're on evacuation alert, they take it seriously. They look at our messaging of what it means to be on alert, to be prepared to leave at any time. And we communicate that out. Evacuation order is the next step. That's where it's the more formal order that you must, by legislation, leave the property and we're doing that to protect really life and safety, and in some cases also has to do with the ability to respond to the emergency depending on what it is. So for example, in the wildfire scenario, the evacuation alert is obviously to protect people, but also it typically needs to be in place to allow firefighters to wildfire fighters to do their job. So a plug of how we do this. So if you don't have this on your phone, download it right now. Buoyant Alert. That's the subscription-based alert system that we use. So we put out our evacuation alerts and orders many different ways through social medias and press releases, and media picks it up. Like conventional media picks it up. But this is the way you can get it directly on your phone. Once you download the app, you select where you want to get the alerts. And this is Cache Creek has used this extensively actually during this episode just to push out information. So the Buoyant Alert can be an evacuation order and alert, but it could also just be an information update. So it's a really handy tool, but to be clear, this is a subscription service. So this isn't the same as the forced push emergency alert system that the province uses, where you get the test once a year where everyone phone goes crazy and starts dinging whether you subscribe to it or not. This will only work if you download the app and subscribe to the service. We also use, just another plug, we actually use this same Buoyant Alert system on our water system. So we advertise this regularly. So when we have boil water notices or water quality advisories, or there's some issue with the water system, we use this mechanism to communicate out to people.
Director Grenier has a question.
Yes.
Thank you, Chair. Jamie, has Colton put together a press release that we can circulate this spring to make sure that everybody in the area or new to the area has got the plan alert or is made aware of it?
Yeah, we do that on a regular, definitely annual basis. I'm not sure if we've done one this year yet.
Yeah, so there was one put out already this year, and it was in conjunction with the city and Thompson-Nicola. So that may have been somewhat localized to this area. So we could look at doing a broader one for the whole TNRD. I'll check with Colton because we also Emergency Preparedness Week was I believe last week. They're all kind of blending together. So we may have actually also done one for Emergency Preparedness Week, but it's a good idea one way or the other. And yeah, we'll circle back with Colton. And if it hasn't happened already, we'll make sure that goes out.
Yeah, Colton just texted me. Press release went out in April. It's on our website.
I seen it.
So yes, yeah, and every opportunity like in these kind of things, when we present to communities, even on our, newsletters, we're often plugging this. So that's why I'm doing it here again. So everyone here is aware. Continue to communicate that out. And you could let people know we don't use it often, so it's not something that plugs up your phone where you get a bunch of push notifications. If you're getting an alert there, it's something important. The only catch, I guess, would be if someone, because you choose the area where you want to get alerts to. So if you, in theory, you could choose to get alerts for the whole province, then your phone might be dinging all the time. But as long as you choose the area that you're interested in. But it's a neat tool, especially for people who may have different properties. Like you may live in Vancouver, but you have a property up on Green Lake. Well, you can choose to get alerts for something that's happening in Green Lake, so you know what's happening there because you may not be paying attention to local media. All right, what else have we been doing? So the other direct flood response activities are sand and sandbags. So we set up community locations where we provide the sand and sandbags for people to come and fill from that location. Just to clarify, and we have a policy around the sandbag placement within the emergency program. So we purposefully choose community locations to set these up because as you can imagine, we can quickly get overwhelmed with requests of having sand delivered to individual people's properties. And when you're in a community-wide flooding situation, we can't do that. So we set them up like this. So this is a hall in Lower Nicola where we set them up.
Jamie, I just got a question. I don't think most people understand how much it costs to get that much sand delivered on site. You got an updated number?
Well, I guess it depends on the area because it's all trucking costs. What were loads in Lower Nicola? $500 a load? $500 a load for sand. And while we're talking costs, and this will be a theme throughout it, the way our emergency operations center and all local governments react is essentially during an emergency, we have to get approval to spend money, which comes through the TNRD, but the approval from the province means we'll get reimbursed for that. So all our activities, even though technically we're the response agency, we really have to ask our big brother, the province, if they approve it to make sure we have the money for it. We have very limited budget within the emergency program that we collect through taxation, really to operate the day-to-day. But all the emergency response activities are funded by the province. And so we need to be very careful to make sure we stay within their rules, or else we can be spending tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars that the province won't reimburse us for. And then we need a mechanism to recover that through taxation.
Director Thorpe?
Thank you. So I have a question. With getting reimbursed. Now, are we asking the province when we see an emergency happening, or is it the province saying to us, hey, we've got a problem up at Gijon Creek, as opposed to us saying we have a problem up Back Valley and going to the province? How does that work? I mean, what's the communication level there, please?
Yeah, good question. So it's us saying to the province, for the most part, we have a problem and we need help. So a specific request in this case, let's say there's risk of flooding in Salmon Valley. So we want to spend $5,000 to send sand and sandbags to that location. Then we submit a request for the province, paperwork that they approve. Yes, we'll reimburse you if you do that. Then we go ahead and call the contractor, organize the sand being delivered, deliver the sandbags, et cetera.
The supplemental, how long does that take?
Like the process of getting approved?
When you submit it and then they approve it? I mean, because time is kind of at the essence. So
Yeah.
how long does that process take approximately?
It's typically quick, and there's certain straightforward things like with sand and sandbags, we know it's an eligible expense. So we wouldn't actually even wait for the paperwork to come through. We would go ahead and do it because we know it's an eligible expense. But in some cases, it's not so cut and dry whether or not the province would approve the expense or not. And then in that case, we wait for the turnaround, the formal approval. Again, it depends on the level of emergency around the province of how much time the province has to respond, but I would say usually within 12 to 24 hours, we would get a written response.
And something we've seen, to the province's credit, this year and last was previously we would have to put in a separate EAF, expense authorization form, like for each load of sand. So I mean, in 2020, I think we probably did over 100 because, you know, every additional load we would send out to Stump Lake or Savinaw was another piece of paperwork. This year and last, they have let us do sort of a blanket pre-approval for sand. The sandbags are essentially free. We can request them from the province and we've got quite a stockpile and there's no charge attached to that. But to Jamie's point, it's the sand and really the fuel and trucking costs. So yeah, this year we had once we were at a level where the province was willing to kind of look at it as a imminent threat. We had a blanket approval for, I think initially about 10 grand worth of cost towards sand and sandbag deployment. And then I think we amended that up again last week or so, just as we were rolling more and more out.
Thank you, Chair. On that reimbursement, on administration and staff time, is that part of the reimbursement?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Staff time, regular staff time is not covered by the province, but overtime is covered by the province. So the regular 9 to 5 of all the staff, like staff that you see here, who majority of our time in the last few weeks has been in the Emergency Operations Center. That's taking us away from a regular day-to-day and focus on the EOC. It's not recoverable, but any overtime wages that are applicable do get covered by the province.
Check it out.
Jamie, can you just explain what the process is? Like the one up Salmon Valley Road last week when someone decided to remove that bridge and the tree out of the creek. What is the process when all that water is flowing down? Who goes out there and makes that decision and explain the process on that whole thing, you know, who gets the contractor and how do we get reimbursed? Yeah. And the second part of my question is, after all this is settled down, can you explain what the process is for the people that got severely damaged, how they go about getting help to remediate their properties?
Okay, good question. I'll touch on that in the presentation coming up, or I'll elaborate on that. So just hold that thought for 1 second. So before we talk about in-stream works, I want to talk about other flood protection responses. So just, you know, the sandbags is a standard thing where we put out sand and sandbags. Now, in some cases, we can do community flood protection. Now, I'm sort of cautious how I say that because in reality, often this isn't feasible. However, in Lower Nicola, for example, we were able to do it this year because we were getting notification from the River Forecast Center from the province saying, yes, there's a high risk of flooding happening on Gishon Creek. We had previously done an engineer report that looked at what the potential flood impacted areas are within this community. So we had an engineered approved plan already to deploy. So then we were able to bring that to the province and say, hey, we want to preemptively put put some flood protection measures in place, and they approved that. So in this case, we had support from BC Wildfire that put in this long sandbag line on the right-hand side that protected an entire trailer park. And then downstream, what's called the Tiger Dam, the yellow thing there, was deployed to protect those properties, not just that house, but other properties further downstream. So generally speaking, we can do this when we essentially have time to respond and when it's a threat to a larger community, not just an individual property. So typically the rule of thumb is if it's one single property, we'll get a sand to a community location, and the homeowner needs to take it on themselves to do flood protection. And here's an example where we could do community protection. Before I move on to Director Houghton's question, do you have anything to add to that, Kevin?
Yeah, so I think just to another example where we've put in something like this was in Savinaw last year. There was a forecast from the province in terms of what the levels of Kamloops Lake would be. And there is a street that's kind of runs parallel to the waterfront there that is kind of one of the usual suspects that often is going to get flooded out. So that was another example where we were able to put in a mixture of tiger dams and other items. And then I think just on the, like with this example as well, even with the engineering report and the experience we had in previous years, the Ministry of Forest still had to go out to Lower Nicola and do a flood assessment before they would approve any works out there.
Jamie, just a question. How do those sandbags get removed? Does somebody come and take them back, or do they just stay there? How does that work?
So when folks are placing sandbags on their own property, so when they go to a sandbagging station, they grab the bags and they lay them out themselves. They're responsible for the disposal of them. And a few slides back, you saw the signage that we put up at all the sandbag stations. So we put that on the signs so that people understand, yeah, perfect, that they're responsible for the disposal. Now, with the ones that are done kind of at the community level, so what was done for the trailer park at Lower Nicola, for instance, we will go in and remove those ourselves because they were actually put in place by BC Wildfire, and it was as part of like a community level protection. Similarly with the tiger dams. Where it can get a little difficult with these green bags in particular is that these are biodegradable. So when we go to remove them, quite often they fall apart when we're taking them out. Unfortunately, that's actually what occurred at Savinaw last year. So we did leave a bit of a mess afterwards, but typically the sand itself usually takes care of itself. Folks have creative uses for it. So we've never had to spend any money in terms of getting rid of the sand. And in some cases it stays. I know at the McClure Fire Hall, for instance, there's still sand there from last year that went unutilized.
So do we get to any reimbursement for the cost of removing?
Yeah, so in the case like with the stuff in Lower Nicola, for instance, yeah, like that will because so both the tiger dams and the sandbags, once the risk has passed, we will go to the province and likely either get a wildfire crew or a contract crew to go out there and demobilize both the tiger dam and the sandbags themselves. And I guess I'll just add to the tiger dam is actually an asset that belongs to Finesse, which is the First Nations Emergency Services Society. It wasn't a provincial asset, and so Finesse was quite supportive and was able to move that in place for us. They were already there doing some protection around some assets that belong to the Lower Nicola band.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Okay, I'm getting to Director Houghton's question now. So, and I expect we'll spend most of our time talking about that question. It's a very good question. Not a simple, straightforward answer, but I think it's worthwhile for us to talk through and sort of unpack because it's a question that will continue to come up and that you'll get from residents and that we struggle with in the Emergency Operations Center every year at Freshet. So talking about emergency in-stream works. So first of all, back to the funding piece. any funding to do that work needs to be approved by the province through what Kevin mentioned, an EAF expense authorization form before we can hire a contractor to do any of that work. So I'm kind of jumping ahead a bit in my presentation, but that's fine. We'll get to Director Houghton's question. So I think the first part of the question was, what's the process for this? So the process is that emergency in-stream works can be done by local governments under a state of local emergency. So which in this example on Douglas Lake Road here, we did declare a state of emergency because there was a need for doing some emergency in-stream works. Now, it's the threshold that needs to be met is, first of all, again, I said the province needs to approve it. They won't approve it until it's been assessed by an expert. So we need to get an expert flood assessor out there on site to say, yes, these works will assist in protecting the property. So in this example, it was removing this tree that was causing the river to further erode that barn. And there was not in this picture, there was actually a bridge that was a private bridge upstream that was acting as a dam. So the flood assessor went out there and recommended, yes, emergency works that are recommended and that would be funded would be removing this tree and removing the bridge to reduce the impact to this barn. And also it was actually to take out part of this barn so the barn didn't end up in the river and cause further damage downstream. So that's a good example where everything worked and it was a success story. One of the reasons it was a success is, yes, the Salmon River went up and was going up, but that process I just talked through, that wasn't a 2-hour process. That was a 36-hour, 48-hour process. So it was eroding this barn, but in other scenarios, as we've seen in the region, like in 2021, we're talking about an hour or two, and then that barn would have been gone. So we need the time to be able to react to it. The next piece is that the emergency works that we're doing, again, need to be funded by the province and approved by a provincial flood assessor. They would only approve that work being done if there's an imminent threat to, and they always use that word, imminent threat to structure or major infrastructure. What is not considered any infrastructure is property. So whether it be farmland, lawn, erosion of land will not get approved for emergency works. And that is a challenge, especially I know we're an agriculture, a lot of our economy is based on agriculture. And we saw that in Back Valley Road, for example, significant chunks of a irrigated farm field that are part of that property, that landowner's business. Even if we were able to respond to that one in time, that one happened so quick, we couldn't respond in time, but it wouldn't have been approved under emergency work. So we couldn't have taken action.
Director Graham, you have a question?
Back to that slide there, the owner of that property was in Vancouver. A little different sort of a cat, what I learned. What if the province says, yes, that stuff should be removed, but you had an angry landowner that says, you stay the hell off my property, ain't touching this stuff. Do you have power to go in there and do it?
Yes, so under the state of local emergency, so with keeping flooding kind of in the context, the two main powers under state of local emergency are ability to do in-stream works without the permit process that you would normally need called Section 11, as well as ability to go onto private land to do work.
One more question on this photo here. What was it, the owner that reported that flooding, or was it one of our members that noticed it?
Yeah, so that's a really good question that came through the owner or the neighbor who reported it. And kind of jumping ahead, but this is all good discussion. Something I will continue to remind the board and this committee on is there's often this misunderstanding or this expectation that we at the TNRD or even the province somehow knows that this is happening when it's happening. I mean, this is Douglas Lake Road between Westwald and Douglas Lake. It's a very remote, rural area. This is, you can't see this from the road. we would have no idea is happening unless it's reported. So it's, you know, the message to say to residents is we need to know something's happening to be able to respond. And you know, I realize what I'm saying here with some of these examples is sometimes we can help, sometimes we can't fully help, or often we can't help to the level that they want help. But at least if we know, we can take steps to try addressing, and the sooner we know, the better. So some of the other flooding that we experienced, like for example, on Back Valley Road, now that happened really quick with Cache Creek going up really quickly. We knew there was impacts to the road, but we didn't hear directly from landowners until a few days into the event when the damage had already occurred. And I'm not saying we necessarily could have responded there, but just an example of the sooner we know, the better. We can't help people if we don't know what's happening.
One more question, the number that we should tell our constituents to call for flooding or fires, what number would that be?
Yeah, so the Emergency Operations Center numbers, and that's the slide later on, but 377-7188 is the TNRD Emergency Operations number. Now, the caveat with that is that number, when the EOC is activated, so if there's already flooding going on or fires going on, that number will be answered almost all the time. But there's also a provincial emergency number, which I have a slide coming up, a 1-800 number that, let's say it's a localized thing. There's a 1-800 number that everyone here should have in their phone. Well, since we're talking about it, let me skip to it right now. Where are we here? Yeah, 1-800-663-3456. That is the provincial emergency number.
Can
So
you give
that's
me that other
monitored
number
24 hours a
again?
day. And that's the number that if something's going on, they will call the TNRD staff on duty. So someone's getting localized flooding in rural TNRD. We don't have our EOC activated. We don't know what's happening. That number will is answered 24/7. And it'll be a provincial staff person somewhere in the province, and they realize it's in the TNRD. TNRD has 24/7 an on-call person to answer our duty phone, what we call. And then once we get that call, we can activate our EOC.
Could you just give us that, could you just give us that number again,
Yep,
please?
and I have it on a slide coming up, and we can send it out, but I'll give it, everyone's got their pens going, so it's 1-800-663-3456. Yeah, and then the TNRD emergency operations number is 250-377-7188.
Thank you.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up question. So EA director gets the call at 11 o'clock at night. And where at that point do you want us to direct that individual to?
Okay, excellent question.
Yeah.
Direct that individual to call and report it directly to the province. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, the 1-800 number. Yeah. And that's, again, we're jumping you're getting at stuff that I have in my presentation, but that's fine. This is because one of the things, and you're reminding me of things I wanted to make sure to cover. Yeah, what's the most effective is having the impacted resident report things directly. So you as EA directors, I mean, it's great that people know to call you, but that's the response you should have back. Okay, call this number and report it. Not you take the information and then you call Kevin or you call. Then things can get lost in translation. We've all played the game of telephone as kids where things get messed up. We want to hear it firsthand from the people being impacted.
Director Grenier?
Thank you, Chair. Jamie, on what is covered and not covered, are pump houses and well infrastructure often down by the river, are those qualifying for emergency response or protection?
Short answer is yes, but this is where things get complicated on this matter. I'll let
Yeah.
Kevin speak to this.
So if it was on private property, for instance, so TNRD has like a flood management policy that we updated in 2021. So if it is on private property and let's say it's their actual residence or it's a piece of infrastructure that supports people living there, so a pump house, a hydro box, a well, That basically would say that they're eligible for, we would bring sand and sandbags directly to the location for them to protect it. But it wouldn't be a situation where we'd be able to go in with tiger dams or wildfire crews, things like that, to protect stuff on private property. If it was TNRD infrastructure, then yes, we would go in and do the work ourselves.
Yeah. So another point on this in-stream works, again, we're using this Westwold example as it was fairly straightforward what the recommendation was and the work that was to be done. So the excavator plucked a couple trees out and we pulled the bridge out of the way, and then outside of the river, we're able to deconstruct the part of the barn that was at risk of going to the river. Now, often the expectation and request demand of the property owner is get in here and get 12 loads of riprap and dump them in the river. Which I understand why they think that, and that probably would help the situation, but that's not within our ability to do that extreme amount of works. And again, back to the province, that's why they would have to send out their flood assessor that approves what needs to be done. And they're not going to say, go dump 12 truckloads of riprap in the river. And even if we, under the state of local emergency, have the authority, even if we said, well, forget what the provincial flood assessor recommends, we want to go dump 12 trucks in the river. First of all, that won't get, it hasn't been approved by the province, so we're paying for that. And the other big piece around this is, yes, we have the ability to do emergency works under a state of local emergency in extreme, but that does not mean we are not liable for any damage cost. Any work we do, we have to report both to the province and the federal government within 72 hours. So we can't not even say we did it. We have to, by legislation, tell them what we've done. And we are fully responsible for the work that we do. So this is an awkward and challenging scenario for us in the EOC, small group of people here in this office trying to make these decisions. And we often then, and that's why we have to rely on, provincial flood assessor to make a recommendation, because we are putting the organization at risk by making those decisions. And we have to stand by those decisions that we're making in the heat of the moment. And that, I think Kevin wanted to jump in on that. That's a major challenge in these situations for us.
Yeah, and if there was a situation where we were able to get something approved, whether it was, say, riprap, because it's considered emergency works, it all has to come out after the event. And I know, Director Laird's quite familiar with that from what occurred at Lower Nick and Gishon Creek in previous years. Yeah, so and obviously that's a pretty thorny one to navigate. So even right now, for instance, we were able to do some work in Brookmere. And put some riprap and did some light stream works there. It's still in place, but technically that work is temporary. The province could come around at any time and tell us that needs to be taken out. Now they haven't insofar, and there is still a log jam upstream of Brookmere that the province has basically said is not something that is going to be easy or potentially possible at all to remediate. So our hope is that the temporary works can remain for quite some time. But yeah, technically tomorrow we could be ordered to remove that. And the other tricky thing, and Jamie alluded to it, is like we work within the provincial legislation, so the Emergency Program Act and the Water Sustainability Act. But the federal government trumps all of that. So even if we're playing by all the rules that the province has put in place for us, as Jamie mentioned, that all has to be reported. DFO can still come around and hit us with fines and things like that if they deem that we've done damage in the course of this.
Yeah, and going back to this example, we removed the tree, we removed the bridge upstream, and we dismantled part of this barn. What was not recommended, which if I was the landowner, I would want to see is, again, in front of this barn, why don't we dump 12 loads of rock in front of it to protect it from further damage? And that is unfortunately something we couldn't do and wouldn't do. And like Kevin alluded to, we'd have to take out anyway. So the emergency works is it all sounds well and good, and yes, it's great to have that power, but it's limited in what we can do. We can't change the stream course. We can't do permanent works to the stream. It's just to deal with the active situation. I'll stick on that slide and go to the next question that Director Houghton brought up. Was around, so, okay, well, when this water goes down, and obviously you can see all of this damage that's been done. I'll go back to a couple other pictures here too, as an example. Yeah, there's an example of Back Valley Road. You can see major erosion happening. So this property where I'm standing taking this photo, the landowners were with me there saying that a week ago, or I guess 2 weeks ago now, what you'd been looking at is about another 25 feet of lawn where they had a fire pit and lawn chairs on the edge of the river. So that's just to give you a sense of how much erosion happened. But the question was, now what? How do they go about reclaiming that? Oh, that's where should I start? That's not something that the TNRD can do, generally speaking. So maybe I'll start at this point. The stance of the province, and it is understandable, is that creeks move, and when creeks move, that's where they move to. They don't have the mandate or even they don't expect the creeks not to move, and they don't plan to move creeks back to where they were last year. So that's an inherent risk of properties near creeks of what happens. So yes, emergency works can protect further damage and and property owners can do things on their own property to prevent further erosion and damage. But reclaiming property is not that straightforward. Anything that can be done there would be in almost all cases would be at the property owner's expense. So we'll use this as an example, or I'll go back to the Douglas Lake example. So if the property owner here wants to put in, like once the water goes down, put in riprap and then add some fill to reclaim some of that land lost, that would need to go through that whole Section 11 process where they go, which is usually a many month-long process to get approval from the province to do those in-stream works. And that would all be at their own cost. There's no money from the province to do repair work like that. And there's no compensation for that lost land. And that's a hard message to say to these people. And every time we have flooding, if people haven't experienced it before, there's this assumption, and I get it, this assumption that, well, it's the province's river, this is a disaster, when are they going to fix it and put it back the way it was? And telling them no, that's not going to happen is a difficult conversation to have. And again, that's why part of your role, we want you to understand that too, to help us gently communicate that out so people understand what we can and can't do. Now, there is examples where we're talking about, so for example, let's talk about a berm, a permanent berm to do, if a certain area is always flooding and damage causing, can a local government put in some sort of permanent structure that maybe protects an entire community from further damage? The answer is yes. We as a local government can go through that process to build a berm. We would need the Section 11 to go through the same process. But we would need to fund it, and then we own it. So it has been done. It can be done, and other local governments have it. We don't have any that we've actually done ourselves that we operate. But so if we were to go through that scenario and create a berm, then TNRD is the owner of that berm that needs to be regularly inspected to make sure it's safe and actually doing its job. And the funding, call it a few $100,000 to do all this major work and bring in the rock. We would have to establish a service and figure out what properties pay into that to fund that work being done.
Director Greening has a question.
Thank you, Chair. On that point, when Cherry Creek flooded, I think that there was a lot of desire by the residents along Cherry Creek to have that happen. Can you give us an update on, and the timing of that? Because by the time you could go in and get this stuff done, we were almost coming into the next season when we really needed that.
Yeah. And Kevin, maybe you can fill in the blanks. I know you weren't here when that happened either, but so the flooding event occurred, damage occurred, water went down. After the fact, then yes, the community said, well, there's this major damage and it's going to continue to erode if we don't do anything. So there was a number of properties that are all in that corridor, and we facilitated a mechanism that we could do one section 11 that covered all of those properties. So the TNRD took out the section 11 instead of 10 separate properties having to do that. And then it was funded. That's the piece I don't know how that.
So the TNRD, and I believe it came out of your predecessor's budget through Director Elliott's budget. The TNRD paid an engineer to basically put together a recommendation for each property. And that was probably a couple $1,000s per property in terms of what works should be done there. But then the property owners were responsible for actually paying to have those works done. Some opted to, some didn't. And that was a fairly unique, that was the first time in the province that had happened. That was a very unique set of circumstances where the province let a local government take out that section 11 kind of as a blanket. And to my knowledge, it hasn't happened since.
Okay, what else have we been doing? And I'm sure we'll get back to that. I have more slides talking about the restoration, but switching gears a bit. Through the EOC, what we did a little more this year than in previous years was actually having some field staff doing some flood monitoring. We knew there was high water and crazy things happening, and it was odd this year because it wasn't the big river systems that were flooding. It was these small creeks and tributaries from this rapid snow melt and these flashy conditions. So we had some staff over the last couple of weekends doing flood monitoring, basically just driving corridors and looking for damage. Again, it's impossible to see everything, but if there's kind of flags that we notice, then we can start to pay more attention to that. The photo here is we actually put in some monitoring locations. We were watching the creeks that were going into Mammoth Lake, which feed Yishon Creek. So we have a sense of what's happening with the water. Is the lake filling up quicker than it's emptying out, or vice versa? And there was no provincial data of what was going in there, so we monitored this ourselves. Okay, so this bunch of this we've already kind of covered, but to summarize under the legislation, so watercourses are not the TNRD's jurisdiction. We don't own or control the watercourses. Provincial and federal legislation that applies to all watercourses. So it's the Fisheries Act on the federal side and Water Sustainability Act on the provincial side. And so as we talked about, local governments can conduct in-stream works during emergencies, but we still take on all risk and liability, and we must report that within 72 hours. To do in-stream works, there must be an imminent threat to a house or infrastructure. And so emergency works, as I talked about, would not be approved for land erosion alone. And as we talked about, under a state of local emergency, we have the extraordinary powers, which are access to private property and to perform those in-stream works. And then on the budget side, again, we don't have any budget for this. All the money for the response will come from the province through that pre-approved EAF. So misconceptions. Declaring a state of local emergency makes funding available. That is not the case in the province of BC. There is no trigger that gets pulled when we declare a state of local emergency. So this year, as well as many other years, there's been questions of why haven't you declared a state of local emergency yet, or when are you going to declare a state of local emergency? We do that for two reasons. One, to do evacuation orders. So that's one of the powers under the state of local emergency. So we need to declare a state of local emergency to be able to issue an evacuation order. And then related to flooding, like I mentioned, it allows us to access private property without owner permission and allows us to do the in-stream work, but it has no connection with any provincial funding. I already talked about the funding mechanism needs to be approved by the province in each scenario as a one-off, regardless of whether there's a SOL in place or not.
And Jamie, one of the problems we had with Stump Lake was obviously doing its thing, flooding. The local residents were demanding the TNRD declare state of emergency exactly for that reason.
Yeah.
But I think to declare, there has to be proof of, risk to property and life. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of things that trigger, you just can't phone up and say, well, the lake's really high and the properties are being flooded.
Yeah.
And in that case, there wasn't risk, so it was never declared.
Yeah, and for us to declare it, the province is going to say, why are you declaring it? We need to justify why we're declaring it.
Yeah, so in my experience, it's never happened, but when the chair or the vice chair signs a state of local emergency, it does still technically go to Minister Ma for final approval. Now, I've never seen one turned back, but theoretically it could be. It's technically not in effect until it's signed off by the minister. So yeah, we've never found ourselves in that position, but yeah, technically EMBC could actually basically override us putting in a state of local emergency.
Okay.
Director Graham?
Thank you. On this funding question, I might have missed it, but did you discuss the FA already?
DFA? No, I'll discuss that in
Okay.
a minute. Declaring a state of local emergency allows residents themselves to do in-stream work. That's also not correct. It's only local governments. So whether it's a state of a local emergency or not, it doesn't mean that people can go drive their own excavator and do their own things within streams or water courses. The other one is that, again, as we talked about, that the TNRD should fix the problem with the stream. So repair the stream damage, put in riprap, dredge the river. As I mentioned, we don't own the creek. We're not responsible for the creek. It's provincial jurisdiction, but their general stance is creeks move and change, and that's what they do. And you could protect your own property, but no work directly in the creek. So unfortunately, there's no magic wand, especially when it comes to that state of local emergency. That is the misconception. Okay, so what are our challenges in flood response? And I think we've touched on a lot of these already. But the main one is flooding is very different and freshet issues are very different than wildfire because there's no dedicated provincial response organization. With wildfire, it's very straightforward that wildfire is responsible for actioning on the ground, fighting the fire. We here in the EOC are supporting really the evacuees and coordinating the evacuation or the alerts and controlling the site, like in terms of maintaining the evacuation order, for example. But we're not out there sending tankers to hit the fire here and choosing which helicopters are going there. That's all BC wildfire. When it comes to flooding, really, it is local governments that need to lead the response. So the question was, who reported the Douglas Lake? Did the province notify us, or did we find out about it? So no, the province isn't out there looking for flooding. They do general forecast modeling and let us know what to be concerned about and what to be looking for, but they're not out there. And even if they do know about it, they're not ready to take action. They're not saying, hey, you need to get sandbags in this location, or hey, TNRD, you need to declare a state of local emergency to do emergency works here. It's all up to us. So that, not that it's easy for anyone, but you take a municipality, think of the example of Cache Creek. They're, what are they, maybe 10 or 20 square kilometers within the village boundaries. They have some assets, some equipment, public works staff. They know every corner of their village, and they could take action. We have 45,000 square kilometers, size of Switzerland. You know, the EOC was staffed by about 6 or 7 people over the last couple weeks. It's very hard to be able to, and I guess what I'm trying to say, it's unrealistic for us to respond to flooding events the same way that a municipality can. We have one dedicated staff person on a day-to-day basis that their only role is emergency response. We have limited equipment. We have one pickup truck in emergency operations to go out and deal with things. We have equipment on the utility side, but you know, very little heavy equipment, or I wouldn't even say any heavy equipment, medium-sized equipment. And we have no budget for response. So again, everything needs to be approved by the province. So what happens next with freshet? So it's continuing. So this, I want to give a plug for this. This is called the Clever model that the province, the River Forecast Center maintains and does forecasts on a daily basis for many water systems within the province. This is publicly accessible, so feel free to Google this, and it's an interactive map. You can click on the different dots and see the daily forecasts. So what you see here is the blue line is the historical actual flows. In this one is the Bonaparte River, for example. And then the red line is the forecasted flow. And then the outer red line, the gray area, is sort of the error bars. Now, I'll repeat what River Forecast Center always says. This is a model. You need to take it with a grain of salt because it's largely based on weather forecasts as well. So there's a lot of variables. Depends on whether the weather forecast actually comes true and the likelihood of different weather events happening. So when you see these, you can quickly panic. It's a regular basis where we see that red line jump up to like 100-year high. Yes, that's a possibility, but it gives us a sense of where we should be worried about. What we don't want is people to look at this and assuming that's going to happen. You'll see, I don't know if you could see it very clearly, but when you start at the left-hand side of where the red line starts, the left-hand side to the right-hand side, their confidence of that being accurate decreases. But anyway, so good news for Bonaparte River. Bonaparte peaked, it went over 100-year high in the Bonaparte, and now the forecast is for it to continue to decline. However, because it's still at very high levels, it's still at risk of being flashy if we get an unexpected rain event. Now, just using a different example, here's what the North Thompson is looking like. So the North Thompson went way up the last week, and then it's been going down, and now it's back up again. So you'll see that red bar spiking way up in a few days. Now that's based on the chance of some severe rainfall events Sunday, Monday of next week. So we look at these on a daily basis, and the River Forecast Center on our coordination call kind of goes through these and interprets them a little bit better. And then switching gears into wildfire season, what's going to happen there? Well, I could tell you the exact date that all the fire is going to start. I wish, but it's obviously largely dependent on the spring rain conditions. Not that it's incorrect, but I find it a bit amusing when we talk about snowpack in December and January, and then the media starts talking about how that's going to impact the fire season. But really largely what's going to impact it is how much rain we get in the spring. I put this graph in here. This is the average rainfall in Kamloops over multiple years. And May and especially June. So June is typically the wettest month by far in the interior. July and August is the driest month in the interior. So the way I would say it is, it's not going to rain in July and August. It never does. Let's just hope it rains in June like it normally does. If it doesn't rain in June, then we know there's a problem. So how bad our fire season is going to be? I mean, as we look out the window and can't see anything, and then we know it's already started in the north, but the next 6 weeks is going to really tell us what's going to happen. So I think I'm switching gears and passing it over to Scott now. Talking more about roles and responsibilities of board.
Thanks, Jamie. Sorry, you have a question? Go ahead. Yeah. Sorry, sure, I just got some questions.
5.3.
We got a question.
Oh, pardon. Go ahead.
Yeah. This a question for Jane, actually two questions. About the local state of emergency, you mentioned it allows TNRD to go do works onto private property. This is, I'm probably asking for Upper Clearwater Volunteer Fire Brigade. Does that extend to them as well? Because that's one of, okay, yeah, that's one of the problems they had was just access to private property where they're not a sanctioned fire department. Okay, doesn't, okay. Second question is, I shared that I think by email during the SILGA, like the Okanagan Basin Water Board. I went to that module and they, gave summary of what their works in the Okanagan Lake and the 19 hydrology monitor stations and how they, return on investment in advanced warning for flooding and erosions. Do you feel that's something that TNRD can benefit?
Yeah, I'll start with the answer to that question. We don't own, and local governments typically don't own and operate their own monitoring stations. So that clever model I pointed out, you can see where the provinces already has many monitoring stations in place. So those are the ones that we use and that have been effective. I can't comment to other local governments that actually have installed their own. Do you know, Kevin, if anyone else? Typically, they're the Water Survey of Canada that installs, and I absolutely agree. The more we have, the better in terms of modeling. I showed you that example where we actually pounded stakes in the creeks because there wasn't a monitoring station there. So now we have this rudimentary system where we can go out and monitor it, but we have to physically drive there and take a picture of it on a daily basis. But the more data you have in terms of flooding, the better that we can prepare. I talked about flood protection measures. We need to know ahead of time if there's a high risk to be able to sort of deploy resources. Unfortunately, in small creeks and systems, often it's too late or too flashy of a system to be able to know what was coming.
Thank you. So supplement to that. So sorry, basically my question is, do you think as EA directors, it's advisable to divert some of our funding, like this, maybe even, I don't know, CCBF or for more of these the water level stakes you mentioned, just driving them, like, do you think we should divert some more budget for that? Or
I think, to be frank, so I mean, if we were to go in and as local government and try to do that, I think there would be a lot of hurdles from regulatory perspective and things like that, because it's not our river, right? So we would have to go through permitting and things like that. I think from, if I may, from a kind of elected official perspective, the efforts would probably be better directed in terms of advocating to the province to say, why isn't there a monitoring station on this creek or that water course? It's a lot more straightforward for the province to go in because they've already got this existing system that's kind of feeding into their data. Whereas ours would be like a standalone. The only one I'm aware of is, and it's a very unique situation. It's in the district of Sicamous. And it's not a water level gauge. It is a very specific and rudimentary weather station that's been set up uphill of a trailer park that is regularly threatened by debris movement and landslide. And it's basically to gauge how much rain has fallen in that area. But that was totally paid for by the province, recognizing there was a very unique threat in that area. And that's the only one I'm aware of. It was actually put in by the local government, but paid for by the province. But that was a pretty specific situation.
Yeah, and I'll add related to that, it was interesting in 2021 atmospheric river, the monitoring station in the upper Coldwater allowed Merritt to be aware that there was a crazy amount of water coming down the Coldwater that was going to be hitting Merritt within 8 hours or so. So they issued evacuation alerts and public notification, I think at midnight, and then the water showed up early in that morning, and that's what started it off. And that was a credit to Merit staff who were actually monitoring that at, I think it was a Sunday night at 11 o'clock at night when that rainfall was happening. So contrary to that, use an example of Cache Creek. So the Bonaparte River has monitoring stations on it, but Cache Creek, which is obviously a very flashy system, if there's a heavy rainfall there, yeah, we're going to know through weather radar that the rain fell there, but we don't know exactly how much water is flowing through the creek higher up the watershed because there's no monitoring station in the creek.
Director Thorpe?
Thanks. It's more of a comment, observation, maybe it's a question to it. When these floods and fires happen, what I'm hearing from people is that they're feeling that they're not being reached out to, or they're not being acknowledged or heard, and I know that they're kind of in a panic situation and they're not always the first one to reach out to us, not knowing maybe what we can offer. So I'm thinking that there's a couple of phases to this, that maybe we can do a better job of promoting what we can and can't do, so people are aware, that they're more aware of the phone numbers. But I'm also thinking, when we have something like this, if we could reach out to those residents, just even if we can't do something, at least they know somebody's listening. I found out Back Valley Road, that was a case. When we're looking at Cozy Corner, there's potential flooding there. Just to have somebody say, reach out to one or two of the residents and say, hey, how are things going? Do you need anything? Is this okay so far? I think maybe when we have the wildfires, that follow-up piece, there's been a lot of articles in the Tyee recently talking about the impacts of the disasters. And the one thing that comes clear is that people are feeling abandoned. And if we could maybe work on trying to mitigate that, I think it would go a long way. And how do we go about it?
I can take that one, because really that's what this, that is kind of a nice segue into this conversation, because the 10 electoral area directors in this room are kind of the ones that are kind of the elected officials in charge of those constituents in a way. And if we can arm you with the right information and making sure that everyone's up to speed and you have the proper training, a lot of times you are getting the calls first, like you've experienced in the last few weeks, where then you'll have numbers at the tip of your fingertips, and you'll have some of this knowledge to be able to share. Because as you've heard, it's really tough. It's really tough for us with just one active person to be calling individuals and asking how they're doing and what we can help with, because it's not feasible. But I hear you loud and clear. So if that's kind of my comment, and maybe as we segue to this now, this is a lot of the similar information that we just talked about, but it's now a little bit more focused on the EA directors. So when you think of our 27 board members, the 10 of you represent kind of all of our rural areas. Everybody else, if there was an issue with a flood or a fire within a municipality, it's a different situation. We may be there to support, we may be there to help, like we have been with Cache Creek, but ultimately it's that municipality, that staff, that mayor and council that would be calling the shots. When it happens within the regional district, within one of our areas, it's this team, and it's the electoral areas that are mainly impacted. So wanted to just kind of walk through some topics, and then as you're thinking through this, if there's other questions, both Kevin, Jamie and I, we'll do our best to answer them. But I wanted to just share some high level information. So roles of the board of directors, provincial jurisdiction, decision making. We've talked a bit about that, as I've mentioned already. EOC structure and communication, and like I said, if you have questions during this, just please reach out. So I think people know this. So like I said, it was about the EA directors, but the chair and the vice chair have a lot to do with this as well, because when we do have emergencies, it's the chair, the vice chair designate who is responsible for declaring that state of local emergency, which is required to have that extraordinary power. If the area you represent is impacted, you'll be notified by TNRD staff. So maybe an example of that would be, we've been in constant contact with Tricia with different issues in that area. We've been in constant contact with others as emergencies are occurring through the regional district. Those that are directly impacted, we reach out to. It's myself, it's Deanna, it's Jamie, it's Kevin. It depends on the size of the EOC. So right now things have slowed a little bit because the flooding is more manageable, but as we're ramping up for potential fires. As these EOCs get bigger and bigger, we have more and more resources that are added, and sometimes we have to shut our entire business down just to manage the EOC like we have in past years, and especially in 2021, where we were in here for how many weeks? 9 weeks, 10 weeks straight in this room, and that's all we did was manage the Emergency Operations Center. So like that's the example. In ongoing emergencies, the board will receive regular updates daily. So you'll get emails from myself or one of the team members saying exactly what's happening, and all the information that we're getting from the province will be disseminated to you. So the last point there, as local elected officials, it's important. You're the important conduit. You're the one that can really help in this situation and in providing the right information to those that are impacted. We've talked about this already as well, what the TNRD does not have authority for. So we don't fight wildfires. We have no rights or authority in waterways, or rivers and lakes, or roads, environment, water and septic, unless it's our infrastructure, policing, or health services. So it's kind of a funny situation that we're in. We're here to coordinate and do all this, but at the end of the day, we got to ask, like I think you refer to them as Big Brother. We need to ask the province to ensure that it's approved and we get the funding. Otherwise, the entire regional district could be put at risk from a financial standpoint, because a lot of these issues and the response that we have are big ticket items. From a provincial jurisdiction and decision-making standpoint, we kind of talked through that part of it. I don't need to read that whole slide. We work really closely with First Nations as well. So we, as things come up where there's emergencies, you're going to see a map this afternoon, a new interactive map that when issues and emergencies are happening, we certainly consult with our First Nations that are impacted to make sure that communication is happening and to make sure that we're on the same page when it comes to evacuation alerts or orders or just sharing of information. But the primary role is safety and resident support while evacuated. We work closely with the province, and as you've heard now throughout this whole presentation, is we ask for approval, and that's how we're eligible for those costs to be refunded or reimbursed. And I got to say, I was going to say it earlier, but that's a huge process in itself. So you can imagine the amount of expenses that are coming through here. Right now, we're running pretty lean with our finance department, and now they're also processing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars of all this other work. And sometimes we need to ask for help to support that. But that's why things slow down during an EOC, because it really impacts our entire organization. Please.
So 2021, we're tens of millions of dollars that we are out of pocket, that we have to go through the process of dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, and able to get refunded. So just think about the risk to the organization, the taxpayer. But in an emergency, we have to respond. But these were like traffic control costs and security costs, and all the risk is on the local government. And then if we do everything right,
we get the money.
We get the money back.
And to our credit, I think we were like probably 99.9% documented. So we got it all. I think there was a couple things that we probably pushed back and got it at the end, but we have to be very diligent in how we do this. And sometimes some of the elected officials will get frustrated with us because we can't, because they expect something to happen sooner, but we need this to happen, or the entire board's going to be at risk and liable for this. So it's really important. I don't have too many slides, so then we'll just take questions here at the end. But the whole purpose of this is to get people out of harm's way and support them until they can return home. That's our role as the TNRD. Kevin, I'll maybe pass the next two slides over to you from a structure standpoint, because we have an active EOC right now, and this is kind of live. So.
Yeah, so the EOC is basically the structure that gets activated and put in place when we've got an event that calls for it. So our EOC here activated on April 29th for the fire up at Pressy Lake, and it's been active since then. And we've alluded to it, but I put some pretty heavy set quotes around the fact that we set aside our day-to-day work in the EOC. I think when you go in there, you'll often see just about everyone's got 2 laptops going, because the reality is the day-to-day work of the regional district isn't stopping. So they might be physically in the EOC and spending a lot of their time working on the emergency role, but there is still things that are time sensitive that we still need to keep going while we're in there as best as we can. This is our This is our organizational chart for yesterday. We've taken to referring to Joe as the Swiss Army King of the EOC because he's filling 3 different boxes on a regular basis for us. And for today, for instance, obviously Mike Knopf's our emergency program coordinator. Mike's in the field today out at Bonaparte River dealing with a property out there. So again, just that kind of constant shuffle of staff, not only for the EOC physically in there, in the field as well for emergency response, and then of course for the day-to-day activity of the organization. So, Jamie, Joe, and myself, chances are, if this meeting wasn't occurring, we would be in the OC right now. So it's just that balance.
If I could just provide some perspective as well. So if you take Kevin, Jamie's usually involved in this as well, but you take Kevin and Joe, and Michelle and Naomi, there's the community services department. So if you're looking for support there for regular business, that's not happening right now. If you look at Gabriella, that's one of our HR people out of the mix. So when it comes to staffing or interviewing, that all stops. When you take a look at Nicole from our GIS team, mapping slows down or stops. Like things really change in our organization when we're under an EOC, like when we're active. So just something to think about when it happens. Back to you, Kevin.
Yeah, so on the left here, we were looking at that organizational chart on the last page. This one kind of shows you how big that can branch out to, and that this would be along the lines of how we were looking in 2021. So this structure is called the incident command system. It's a fairly universal one used throughout most of the Western world. So when you see folks in the different colored vests and things like that, it's based on that structure. So it's going to look different day to day, depending on who's in the EOC and what the level of kind of activity is. But in terms of, where the board fits in, it's a little hard to see, but off that EOC director green box at the top, you'll see the policy group. So generally that is the role that usually Scott or Deanna will be sitting in as basically the conduit from the elected officials from the board into the EOC. And then, so the staff positions filling out kind of these colored boxes below. The right-hand side, and again, kind of hard to discern up on the screen here, but we've looked at this one before. Really, this is the provincial structure for emergency management. And where we fit in really is on the lower half in terms of the local site support through the EOC. And then in the case of flooding, and particularly the actual site response as well. So just to put in perspective how many moving parts there are with the province, with federal agencies as well, that are all kind of acting in concert here. And also a bit of a, to be frank, there is a bit of, especially once we get into higher levels of activity, there is also a bit of feeding the beast in terms of requests coming down to us from the province for updated statistics, situational awareness, things like that, because that's then flowing all the way up to, the Premier's office and in some cases the Prime Minister's office as well, depending on what's going on. So this is just laying out what that structure looks like, both within the organization and outside of it through the broader response.
So deeply ingrained into my mind is the summer of 2021. So if you take a look on the left, we had probably 30 people in here 24/7. We would probably end up working anywhere from, depending on the day, 12 to 15, 16, 17-hour days, and then still take the phone home. Somebody would be dedicated to that. But that one was such a huge event, as everyone can probably remember, where you had ministries, deputy ministers, you had MLAs and MPs calling. It was a significant event, and hopefully this isn't another year for that, given some of the conditions and some of the issues we're having. But these can ramp up to kind of the size they're at now, where we're trying to manage, but are still important. But it can get to the extensiveness of just a huge emergency that we're all impacted. And then there's so many things that I can remember from that, just looking out that window and watching, the hills around Kamloops getting struck by fire, and then Juniper happening, and then the whole city going crazy while we have major fires all around us. It was quite the interesting situation. So hopefully that's not triggering for anybody in the room. From an EOC structure and communication as well, we're always in constant communication with our partners, so provincially, federally, locally, First Nation residents. We do our best through Buoyant Alert, we do community meetings, and that's where a lot of the electoral areas get involved. Is if there's something significant happening within your area, we'll call on you and work with you to have a community meeting where we can pull people together and provide information, subject matter experts, contractors and vendors, elected officials, and of course, the leadership team here. And then just the last 2 pages, which we've really already talked about, is there's 2 scenarios. There's flooding and then there's also wildfire scenarios. And so they're a little bit different. Their response is a little bit different. So during flooding, it's the forecasting comes from the province. We have coordination calls on a daily basis. We sometimes become not only the EOC, but also we're doing a lot of the work in contracting that to get things done during freshet or other atmospheric rivers or rain events. And then during flooding, it's really BC Wildfire that takes the lead on this one. And then we follow in with our expertise and work through all of our other means to ensure that the work is being done and communication is getting out there. But I'll leave it at that. And just if you wanted to, please go ahead.
I added one slide and I didn't tell you about that. I was gonna speak to.
Oh, there you go. Go for it.
So this is the last slide and then we can go to
Gotcha.
discussion. So I snuck this one in. So I just kind of wanted to kind of close the loop and back to what Scott mentioned as you as the area directors. I mean, it's really your communities that we're going to be supporting directly. So how can you help? What's your role? What can you do in here? So these are the numbers we talked about already. Those are the 2 numbers, and yeah, we can't help if we don't know something's happening. And
Yeah, in this group, as you look around, 8 of you are never experienced this before. And within our regional district, there are 8 of you are new. Herb and David are the only 2 that have that experience. So if you have questions, please reach out. I know a lot of you have been, and we continue to support, but just wanted to make sure that you're aware of kind of the situation as it stands today and some of your responsibilities and things that we can work through. So sorry, back to you, Chair.
I got a couple more.
Oh, you added more?
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, I'm done yet.
See, we talked about communicating.
Yeah, communicating.
We're
So,
working on it too.
so I mentioned that, we want the impacted residents to contact us directly or the provincial line directly and not sort of have it filter secondhand through you or someone else in the community. But what you could help is communicate out the messaging to your community. So especially during an active emergency, we're going to be sending out messaging, but we know that there's local ways within those communities through local social media or through, your own impromptu community meeting at the coffee shop that you can update people. So use the area director, especially if there's an emergency in your area, feel free to call us in the EOC and we'll give you the most up-to-date firsthand knowledge of what's happening. I remember a few different times when there's EOCs going on, the area director would call and I'd say, wait, I'll call you. We'll talk right after the coordination call so I can give you the most up-to-date info. And then it assists us that maybe our phone, not that people can't call us, but then maybe our phone rings a little less because you guys are communicating directly with residents of what's happening, what's the latest in the fire or the flood situation.
I know the Facebook groups really worked well back in that situation where as soon as they got the information, EA directors were sending that information out.
Yeah. So Director Graham talked about DFA, that's called Disaster Financial Assistance. That's a provincial program. So that's just one example of what you can do from an advocacy perspective. So when we talk about recovery, we're talking about what needs to be done after the emergency is dealt with and clean up and repair, et cetera. And there's a provincial program called Disaster Financial Assistance that really gets declared by the province on a case-by-case basis, different eligibility criteria depending on what the emergency is. And that's just one example. There's other recovery programs that you could work to advocate for. I already explained that we within our current structure and funding, we don't have any funds to go out and do that direct recovery work, but following 2021, we had a partnership with the Red Cross because Red Cross had a bunch of donations and they came and asked for program ideas. And finally, I was struggling with the wording on this, but I think it's really important to talk about, and Director Thorpe brought this up already. My ask is to encourage residents to be prepared for emergencies and to be self-reliant during emergencies. Now, I know that's a scary word, but I think it's important to be realistic, especially in this day and age where we have a lot of, let's just say, city people moving to rural areas. And they expect that there's emergency happening and 3 police cars and a fire truck and an ambulance are gonna show up in 5 minutes. And you people who've lived in rural areas for a long time know that's not the case in a lot of situations. So I think that message needs to continually and gently get out there, is that, you know, the level of expectation of how we can respond and what type of response to receive is not the same in Burnaby as it is for, you know, somewhere in Birch Island, somewhere, you know, in halfway between Merritt and Spence's Bridge. It's a different level of response in reality. And that's a hard thing to say, but I think it's important that we be realistic and within this group, you know, sort of acknowledging that and try remind people of that, because people need to be prepared. I mean, I'll use an example of a question I got, and nothing wrong with this question, but it just shows sort of the expectations that are out there from it was a rural community, and their question was about emergency response planning. And they said, okay, well, I want to make sure that in the emergency response plan for this community, that it addresses how my horse will get evacuated during a fire. Right? The expectation was that we were going to go to their house, move their horse, and send it somewhere safely. And that was going to be built into our plan for their community. Where in reality, you know, emergency response plan is much broader scale for that. And it's, you know, you're responsible for your own planning, and the more planning you can do, the more it frees us and any other response agency from dealing with where the real need is. So I'll leave that comment at that, and we can move to discussion now.
Thanks, Jamie.
Any questions from the Lee?
Did you beat me, Dougie, or am I up? I think, thank you very much. A pretty simple question, and it's around the communication out in the situation. We all have alternate directors. And I would view my alternate director as also being somebody that would be a team player in terms of with that communication. But here's the question, I guess. Is there any liability associated? So for example, we're sitting in a board seat, we've got some sort of liability coverage if something is said incorrectly and causes something. Would that same apply to our assigned alternate directors assisting us as well?
That's a good question. I know for a fact that the board would be, so if I they are actively your alternate, then they would. But if you were still in place and they were making comments, that might be more of a risk. So they would need to be officially your alternate. So if you weren't here today, you were on vacation, your alternate was here, then that would carry through. But I will follow up on that just to make sure, because that'd be my understanding, but I just wanted to make sure we got the right answer.
Director Hood.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. This is a comment made to Kevin. Kevin, we all have a mutual friend in Kevin Boone, who's the general manager of the BC Cattlemen's Association. He's from a little town called Tomahawk, Alberta, just outside of Drayton Valley. And as we all know, it's getting burnt up as we speak. And I just sent him a note the other day and I said, sorry to see your homeland burning up, Kevin. He said, yeah, it's a little hot over there. Just got off the phone with some of my counterparts and trying to help navigate the system. I said, well, I hope they adopt the Reg Steward program like the folks back here did a few years ago, because Reg is another mutual friend of ours. And Kevin and I are heading to Vernon again for the BC Cattlemen's meeting next week. And he wants to sit down and talk to me about my next statement here. And he's, well, Dougie, we should talk about that. We are presently working with BC Dairy, Reg Steward, and the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries to develop and roll it out all over the province. Reg suggested we don't push the actual system we put together, but the philosophy behind it of a 3-tier essential service of agriculture, especially for livestock, for them to adopt. If they acknowledge the philosophy, then the permitting will fall in place. Doug, please let's get together at Vernon next week. So I don't know if you've been in contact with Kevin or what that's all about, but I thought I'd make you aware of it.
Yeah, no, I hadn't heard from him recently, and I guess for the context of the rest of the committee. So in 2017, Reg Stewart and BC Cattlemen's and the Caribou Regional District and BC Wildfire put together a pretty robust system in terms of access passes for agricultural operations. We were able to adopt that in 2021 here at the TNRD level, and that's what Mike Deedles was spending most of his summer doing, was trying to coordinate those access pieces. Now, it worked fairly well for us. So I think what Kevin Boone's vision has been to try to take that model that Caribou and ourselves have been doing and trying to get that kind of more consistent across the province. Because we even ran into it in 21. You know, a lot of those fires were spanning across different jurisdictions. So what the system we had in place was fairly similar to the Caribou, because we essentially adopted theirs. But once we were, looking at White Rock Lake, for instance, once people were on the other side of the line, it was a bit of a different system. A gap there is that that was tailored towards, the major branches and agricultural outfits. It still leaves a large gap in terms of the smaller operations, hobby farms, things like that. And that's definitely something that I believe the province is trying to address with some of the new emergency legislation that they're working on. That's been pushed back to the fall, so we haven't seen what that looks like, but we have reiterated when we've been talking to the policy folks putting that together, that the both, livestock commercially, but also the smaller outfits, regardless of whether they're farm status or premise ID, et cetera. That's a huge issue that I think honestly is it's easily overlooked for folks sitting in Victoria, quite frankly, who don't understand the realities out here. So there's been a lot of advocacy around that. And yeah, certainly if you're meeting with Kevin on it next week, I'd be keen to hear what comes of that. Yeah.
I'll make sure you get the feedback. I just want to make you aware that sounds like something is rolling provincially. So, and I know Director Thorpe has been talking about the smaller ma and pa farms, and they're just as important. So thank you.
And I just maybe to dovetail on that, and I don't have all the information, but Ministry of Agriculture has also set up a dedicated emergency management department within the ministry. I don't have a whole lot more information than that. I met the person at a meeting here in Kamloops about a month ago, and that was the first I had heard of it. So that's good news as well, because agriculture was very helpful in 2021, but it was sort of a rotating crew of what staff they could make available at the given time. So it looks like they're acknowledging that issue as well and trying to get kind of more hands-on involved with it. Yeah.
You knew I was chomping at the bit, didn't you? I really would like to see more advocacy for the hobby farms and the small operations, because there was in 21 the ability for larger commercial operations, but there was nothing from a personal point of view for those hobby farms. And it's pretty devastating when that is the only thing that you have left, is a few animals that are survive and you can't get in to get them out to safety. So I think we really need to strongly advocate to include those hobby farms and small operations in this. They can't be overlooked. Thank you.
What I strongly recommend that they join their local livestock association, Horse Council of BC, those kinds of associations that coordinate that kind of stuff. Because you can do it on your own, be better off if you're part of a larger group. And those are two groups that are very powerful in this province.
Any other questions? I've just got a little bit of information on what happened at Gishon Creek when it flooded so badly in 2017. I got elected in 2018 and I dealt with the follow-up of removing the temporary dikes that were put in Gishon Creek along the edges. It was a $750,000 cost to the TNRD. The money couldn't be recovered until the berms were removed. It was very contentious for the property owners along Gishon Creek. I think there's about 25 or 26 property owners. We went and had a community meeting around it, and it was quite very loud and raucous. That we explained that until the berms come out, the TNRD has no opportunity to recover any of the costs for that flooding. The TNRD worked with the contractor, and they made a couple of decent, really good offers, I felt. If you didn't want the berm removed from your property line, they were allowed to push the berm back onto their private land, and it would be sitting there if they ever needed it again. Very few people took that option, and we removed it all. So it's interesting, the follow-up that happens after a major event. And flooding seems to cause probably very contentious issue amongst very few people. So wildfire is quite different. It's a huge, usually quite a large population involved. So it was an interesting process to do the follow-up and deal with the residents. So that's just a bit of insight on what happens after the fact.
I just want to come and say something about the hobby farms, because since 2017, the Fall Fairgrounds and Barrier has been kind of a hub for evacuation for those kind of animals. So I would suggest in your communities that you talk to your people who have hobby farms and make a plan. Where can we go if we have to evacuate on this highway, or if we have to go on that highway? Because there are many fairgrounds that are now prepared for that. Like right now, we're meeting with our new volunteers. We're training them. We're getting set up for if we're needed. All we got to do is pull out the Tupperware boxes and we're ready to go. So that's something that people need to know, because in the panic, they don't know where they're going, what they're doing, right? So if they have a plan of some sort, if you can get out on this highway, head for Williams Lake. If you can get out on this highway, head for Barrier. If you can't do that, head down to Kamloops. So that way it helps a lot with the panic part.
I would completely agree with you. And I think that a lot of the hobby farms, I know we had a plan in place. If something happened, the problem was we were not at home when the fire happened. We were trying to help evacuate the village. So sometimes your best laid plans don't work. And I mean, it's great. And I think we all need to have that evacuation plan, not just for ourselves, but our animals.
But if you can get your community to meet and prepare ahead of time, people will know that farm up there, we know the people aren't there. And maybe if they have time, they'll go get your animals out. Maybe not, maybe they will. I'm not saying, but we had amazing things that happened that way, where we got, 6 or 7 horses brought in from Monte Creek or something, that the people couldn't get home, but there were people there evacuating, and they went and got those horses. So if they know they can take them to a reputable place that's gonna make sure they know where the horses came from, who the name of the owners are, that's another big one. So, yeah.
Director Hooten.
I'm gonna direct this one at Jamie, and I think he knows who I'm talking about. Can you explain the pros and cons? There's people that don't have the resources maybe to do it ahead of time to protect their water system ahead of time financially or with the equipment. And then there's people that have major operations that have the ability, the equipment, the sand, the dirt, the rock, and they go and start working on, they know there's going to be a wreck coming, and they do it ahead of time and protect their land and resources with berms or however they do it. Can you explain the pros and the cons of doing that, and what could be the after effects?
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought that up. It's a good question that gets brought up. So we'll start with this, that the stance is that private property owners can do works obviously on their own property to protect their own property. But,
prior to a flood situation happening. However, the clarification, if someone asks you, you need to clarify that there still is restrictions legislation around what you can do up to the bank of a water course. So before someone starts doing something like that, they should check in with the province, like Front Counter BC would be the first call to make to confirm if they don't know what you can or can't do. You know, what type of materials that you should use or shouldn't use, because what could happen after the fact, if you go ahead and do this work, on, let's say, above high water mark on your own private property, there still could be issues around the material that you're using. And then during a flood, it can cause sedimentation, and there could be, you know, liability, not liability, it could be enforcement done by the province because you're doing work that was not permitted. So I think that's the short answer to the question, is to confirm what you are or are not allowed to do in terms of next to a water course within the provincial legislation. Anything to add to that? Yeah.
No, I don't think so. And again, just that, yeah, the DFO from the federal side can also step in. So yeah, there is, you know, in instances where folks have done works in the stream. So, you know, Jamie was talking about, you know, works on the private property, kind of, that's a bit of a different situation, but as soon as they're in the stream and it's not, you know, permitted ahead of time, yeah, there can definitely be some pretty serious repercussions to that, but that's, we don't really have any role in that. It's the province and the feds.
Director Smith? Yeah, is there, I guess for Jamie, is there a riparian area on creeks as well as lakes?
Yes, yeah. It's 30 feet, and I guess it depends on what context we're talking about from planning versus, you know, environmental restrictions, but it's generally 30 meters. Oh, yeah.
So any repair work that this contractor would be starting to do to protect his property would have to be back of that.
Well, with having no restrictions, yes. But there is things you could do within that 30 meters, and I don't want to speak to specifics because I don't know the details, but there is things that could be done within that 30 meters, and there's things that can't be done within the 30 meters. So that would depend on, so the example I think that Director Houghton's referring to is this berm was placed, but it was basically a dirt berm that wasn't compacted. There was no rock in there. So the risk is that then if it did flood, then all that soil is just washing downstream and causing issues further downstream as well as sedimentation. But if instead it was rocks and boulders, like a riprap on their own private property, that there's no risk to the stream. So there wouldn't be an issue with that.
Director Thorpe.
So this is a after the fact issue. We hear a lot about villages like Cache Creek. We don't hear much about Vac Valley. When it comes to funding and the provincial or the federal government steps in, and we could look at Lytton as an example, but the TNRD people around that area. How can we, as the TNRD board, and maybe working collectively together, advocate better and make federal and provincial governments aware that it's not just that village or that city, that it is also often the surrounding area that is affected, and they need the funding every bit as much as the residents of a city or a village. How can we advocate better so that these people aren't falling between the cracks?
It's a really good question. And I'll pause on the advocacy question first. And I think just something to add to the why it's, I think some explanation of why it's unclear and why it's typically at least appears that there's no assistance for the rural areas is because we as the local government don't have very much infrastructure, very little infrastructure. So we'll use Cache Creek for example. They had roadways, bridges, culverts, their own fire hall, their sewer lines, their water system. So
forget all private properties, and they had major impacts to their own infrastructure. And not to say that Back Valley Road did not take significant damage to those private properties, but is in terms of the TNRD, we had no infrastructure there that was impacted. So that's kind of one piece there. The second piece, which is a good comment on private properties, I absolutely agree. I think it's important that the TNRD continues to advocate that whether you're in a village or in a rural area, that any assistance program for private landowners be fair and equitable. How to do that? I don't know the answer to that question, or how to do that better, because I could say that, you know, area directors here, including yourself, have been doing that, and I think making a difference.
Houghton? Oh, have you got, no, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. Kevin, earlier, Director Sao talked about streams where we didn't have any of the data. And then earlier, I guess, at the start of the EOC's opening, I came in to see you and we didn't have any data on Cherry Creek, which is was the subject in 2021. I wonder if you could compile a list of streams that we need data on and ask the province, that part of that advocacy that you talked about. If we could start compiling that list that Director Sao talked about, and maybe add Cherry Creek to it. And I wasn't quite clear if Deadman Creek was also monitored or not.
Yeah, I think there's probably, you know, a half dozen or so off the top of my head that, yeah, and certainly Cherry Creek being one of them, where there is a lack of monitoring stations. So I think that's something we could work on. The Deadman is monitored, both the Deadman as well as Chris Creek, where it enters into the Deadman. Yeah, those both do have monitoring stations on them.
Probably try and help Director Thorpe out here and folks from Cache Creek. Seems like we've had an issue in Back Valley and that for a few years. I'll just explain a little bit of the history of probably why part of that happened. Years ago gone by, Christian Ranch Limited owned from the top of Wallachine Hill at the rest stop right to Perry Ranch at as you're entering the big straight stretch there where all the potatoes are now of Jordan Krause's. A number of years ago, they sold their property to CN Rail Company for a ballast rock operation, and the ranching portion has been leased to the Monaco family from 100 Mile. And what has happened is they don't give two hoots about the ranch or the farming. As you can see, it's dried up along the highway and they don't allow any irrigation because they don't want the water going down through the ballast rock. So the whole operation has changed. The top side of the highway is a grazing operation, and the back valley is a little lake called Dairy Lake. In a number of years, when Christian Ranch owned it, partway up Back Valley Road, there's a water diversion with a weir and a box, and part of that creek went to Dairy Lake. So we had a cattle drive camp there many years ago, and that was full. And Christians managed it, took the water as they needed. Now, talking to Jordan Krause and Monaco's, they don't give two hoots about Dairy Lake anymore. So I don't know if they still hold a water right or a diversion right, but I think it should be up to the ministry. There is a way of taking part of that water and storing it in Dairy Lake, even if you never use it for irrigation. It'll take the pressure off of Cache Creek. Somehow the Ministry of Environment, CN Rail, should come to the table and help a bit and take part of that water. Because most times people give their eye teeth for water, and that would help downstream at where Semlin Ranch diverts their water, and definitely help the town of Cache Creek. So I think Jackie Taggart should get involved and work with the different ministries and get to work on it. Thank you.
Any other questions? All right, put my mic on. That'll help. So it's a roundtable opportunity to tell the rest of the directors what you're doing and what's happening in your area.
Sure. Thank you, Chair. There's a number of things happening in my area that I'd like to bring my fellow directors up to speed on. I made a presentation, first speaking about north of Kamloops Lake. Area J north of Kamloops Lake has about 300 people living there. So call that 100 households in the Tronquil Valley, Alpine Valley, Red Lake area, and then other parts. There's been an initiative by those groups to have a community center. I presented to the school district last month because they have a parcel in Alpine Valley that was a former school site. They removed the portables, they removed even the playground. And we're advocating for a community hall for that area. The presentation went fairly well. I know Jamie is now in consultation with the staff at the school district. The school board has said, yes, they want to work with us. And so my hope would be that we would be able to, or as the area director, could persuade you that some of the gas tax money that we have for our area could go towards seeding a community center, always with the view to kind of pushing back the infrastructure so that it's community driven, community maintained, and offset the operational costs to the community. That's one initiative. I can tell you that Fire Smart is very big in our area. I got a call from Lac Lejeune. There's been 3 meetings now, community driven for Fire Smart in Cherry Creek. And we're very much looking forward to those brochures. I was told the other night that our staff were at a Fire Smart meeting in Vancouver, that our people are looking for 150 brochures to hand out door to door to door so that it can help people get ready for Fire Smart. We're in the Fire Smart season. So just that's a feedback to staff as well, that we're really keen to get that going. Also in our area, fire halls for Tobiano, some kind of a proposition to the Cherry Creek people that might piggyback on that. And then this crosses again over into Fire Smart, where there seems to be support for things that are called bush trucks, which aren't quite fire trucks, but are rapid reaction to a fire in a rural area that doesn't have a hydrant. Over in Savinaw, of course, we've all talked about our desire for water treatment, and that seems to be a major issue, but there's also an initiative to create a sidewalk or walkway along that roadway in the interior Savinaw Road, because people are fearsome of walking along the roadway. Those are some of the high points of what's happening in my area. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Nothing really earth-shattering. Ongoing is, of course, is the Loon Lake Fire Hall, which is on track to be finished, I believe, around July. Jamie, is that?
Yeah, they're almost at lockup. And yeah, they're around July, August for transfer over. Then we'll put in the furniture and stuff like that.
The feeling in the community is starting to be a little more positive. I don't know if anybody knows, but there was a big division in Loon Lake about the whole operation, but it seems to be more people getting on board with it. They obviously understand the importance of it. And the chief is extremely excited about getting going. As well, the community hall, which has been a fairly big renovation, it is just in the final stages now of finishing off. So I expect the grand opening for that is going to be coming up very shortly. I'm also working on a project right in 70 Mile, which is an equestrian center, they're calling it. It's been decommissioned for probably about 20 years, but years ago, apparently it was a real hub of the community for gymkhanas and all sorts of horsey stuff, which I'm not interested in, but it's a great, sorry, Doug. It's a great location and it's actually not in that bad a shape. And so far the interest in going forward with it has been tremendous from all over the place. Actually, I'm surprised at how many people now that I've talked to are very interested in what it's going to look like and how well it's going to work. So yeah, that's about it.
Last time I rode horses in safely, I'm gonna order
Director Ansel?
Okay, so I will talk about area B. First of all, I'd like to thank Sherry Madden for all of the work that you have put into our area. And I used to sit on the Thompson Headwaters Services Committee, and it's shocking to me how slow things can progress, but they do progress and things happen. And so thank you very much, because there has been a lot of good things happen in Blue River, and I think often, and in Avola, but I think oftentimes the constituents focus on the fact that things are going too slowly, or that they're not actually seeing the progress, or focus on the cost of things versus the absolute benefit over the years that it'll provide. So that's part of the communication that I am constantly talking to people about, is that things take time. Sometimes they cost more than what it is. And then ultimately you are left with something that it can be amazing. So anyway, thank you. One of the things that Blue River has been working on, and is near and dear to my heart, is the community garden. And so that was revitalized in 2018, and it was my husband, myself, and one friend. And we took over a tennis court that had 8 garden boxes and weeds that were as tall as my head. And it has just grown phenomenally, and the whole tennis court is filled. We live in a food desert, and now people are realizing the benefit of growing their own food at home. We've worked with the elementary school, so they start all of the starter plants in their indoor garden, and so they're learning how to garden and tend these plants, and then they will come to the community garden and plant them within the community boxes, as well as 2 of their own. And the community boxes are for anyone to come in and harvest food, and it's free for them. And then we also have members of the community garden, and the only thing that they have to pay is their time. And so we do 2 to 3 hours volunteer time per month. So anyway, that is a phenomenal success. So we, in 2018, had 3 volunteers, and now I'd say we have 35 regular volunteers in a very small town. So it's a great success. We've had a few unsuccessful things, like I've just read an email about our luge hill, which we want to get brushed, and so things that again seem to be going very slowly, or this was through Trans Mountain, and I'd had a conversation with them, and they had agreed that it would be something that would get done, but now they're saying that they didn't agree to this. And so, you know, it can just be a bit frustrating trying to get things done in a timely manner. And anyway, I won't go into all the details about the luge hill, but we've had a couple unsuccessful things, but a lot of great successes. And then over in Avola, the community, I just had a community meeting there, and they have a few requests that I'll be talking with Jamie and Sherry about. But in general, I'd say the community is happy with me as their TNRD rep, which is good. And we're keeping, and we'll just keep that vibe going, I think. But yeah, anyway, that's, I think, it from me. Thanks.
Director Morris.
Thank you. Couple things I'll start off with is North American Indigenous Games, just as an information piece. I was very fortunate to be given the opportunity to work on that bid committee on behalf of the TNRD, essentially. And they have made their presentation. I think we have an excellent shot at actually earning this particular event for the area. But it's going to affect, it's not just affecting Kamloops at all or to Kamloops, but also all of the our First Nations communities and their young athletes and young people. So I think we'll get a decision in July is the final date. The committee has just come back from making their pitch. Calgary is the competition. We can beat them for sure. In any case, so that has been very rewarding, but I think on many fronts, because we have First Nations communities throughout the TNRD. I've certainly got a few within Area P. And so the relationships there and my ability to at least say chum effectively is getting better, which is good. Couple of kind of other neat things I think is the energy around the community associations. Most of you know I was an alternate for 3 years before Mel Rothenberger stepped aside and let me come in. But what I see is a change in the strength and the enthusiasm of some of the community associations. Pinatan. Thank you, Joe, for a little bit of help there as well. I have to give him credit for this one. We've had some real successes there in terms of use of the school and then what other broader community events can happen. And I sensing this sort of energy even in Pinatan, seeing that they can do more now and it can be done with the school and it helps everybody out. That's good. Whitecroft is the next one. They're right on the heels now. The base of Sun Peaks or whatever, but Whitecroft also now is moving towards that. So I think that's really good. And then you get Heffley cleaning up bugs still, but trash would be in the rural communities and all of the little ones that I'm involved with. Dumping of trash is still this really critical issue. And I don't know where we go with it, but you get people out picking up everybody else's trash, whether it be the Pritchard Bridge or it be the Heffley Community Association in Armor Creek. It's also a threat for us in terms of fire as well. So I think we need to be thinking about, well, we have programs through the TNRD where those volunteers who are picking up all that crap, literally, are getting some support in terms of free dumping and or whatever you tipping, whatever you call it. Sorry, you might have my terminology wrong, but I think we need to just keep in mind that volunteer core that are helping clean up the mid-country, possibly the backcountry for us, which is good. Yeah, that's it for now.
Director Sutton?
Thank you, Chair. So Area A, actually with the Director Granier's mention of the fire halls, this brought up, I need to follow up with our TNRD staff team about there was a suggestion for saving some of these like Loon Lake fire hall, some of these recent fire hall construction. Maybe anything that can be standardized, that could be saved so that in the future, places like Upper Clearwater, if we have a new fire departments, any potential cost savings that we can apply the blueprints again, or maybe even looking at like standardized TNRD fire hall, and we can apply that. So so that's been going on in the Upper Clearwater, trying to find funding for the fire brigade there because they're not a sanctioned recognized fire department. They got some servicing for their apparatus coming up. So I've been in touch with them about fundraising and different avenues of funding. Bylaws. So yeah, being a newly elected officials, people, the misconceptions that, we're here to make their problems go away. We certainly find ourselves in the middle there. And I'm slowly learning my ropes with the help of Scott and Regina. So thank you very much for that. And also, I'm fairly infamous for my pie in the sky idea sometimes. I just read stuff in the media and go, oh, hey, why don't we have a solar farm that's going on in Merritt? Sorry, I'm not sure actually. Now I forgot where it was. Somewhere in Merritt. Yeah, in Lower Nicola. Okay, yeah. So, but I understand, like today was importance, describing the EOC when that happened, when they become activated. Jamie's not there to answer, your pie in your sky ideas. So I'll find time for that later. And then advocacy, I met with Minister Kang, who's the Minister of Municipal Affairs in Burnaby when she had an event. So I gave her our Discover Wellsbrae Park book, and also mentioned to her, some of the struggles we have as a regional district, funding, and how we look to. I joked with her how when they were announcing, Prince Rupert getting $60 million for their septic or whatever, and then I was watching. It was like I was watching the lottery every night, and I was, when's TNRD? and it was quite pleasant to find that Minister Kang, she's been in politics for a while, but I find she's not very. She can be very informal and very approachable. So I hope that kind of applies to other ministers as well. And I will try to continue to, I have this idea of a mail out kind of campaign. I'm going to start mailing out books about our area so they can put in their office. So, visitors to their office can, know more about our areas. And then DOC, the teamwork with my municipality within Area A, the District of Clearwater. Mayor Blackwell has been, and Mayor Stamer as well, has been very kind to take on the charge for the highway safety, Highway 5. And it's good teamwork. I don't, not too many chefs, in the kitchen. So it's good sometimes to step back and work as a team. Yeah. Hospital, I met with the manager of clinic operations, Heidi Schilling in Clearwater just yesterday. I apologize, it took me 6 months in office before sitting down with our hospital manager, but at the same time, we all have other jobs and stuff. So she was quite understanding, but there was some asked about funding, different avenues of funding for equipment that it would be nice to have, such as a newer model of certain equipments that would actually has an impact on recruitment, because students nowadays, they leave their school and they want to play with the latest equipment at the hospital. They come to a hospital in a rural setting and they go, oh geez, that's like a 20-year-old machine. I can hardly lug that around, or it's out of date. So it actually discourages. I just learned that yesterday, that discourages recruitment and retention. So and then Tourism Wellsbrae, I sat in one of their board meetings last week. Again, it took me a while, 6 months, to sit in on one of their meetings, but it was a good time to start and understanding their issues. And trying to do my part. Social media, actually I sent out a social media request for volunteers for their info center, and actually had a few inquiries. One is signing up, so fingers crossed that goes somewhere. And then I met with the park operator in North Thompson River Park the other day as well. And just seeing, it seems like, this, last year was technically reopening after COVID, but this year is like the kind of, back and forth year. A lot of operator, that operator hired an extra staff to cope with, with the trails maintenance and stuff. So I think, back to Tourism Wellsbrae, BC Parks representative was there, and they explained that the funding level for the Wellsbrae Park programs, trail maintenance, is one of the highest in her memory. So it's a good sign. I think the province, different ministries are, opening up their checkbooks. And then, back to the park operator. My conversation with her, as a small community, it turned out her son-in-law was one of the foremen for Argo, which is one of the MLTI contractors in our area. And it's good for, I think, us not to just take the side of residents, the side of the complaints. Complaints could be valid, and sometimes, they might not. Case in point, she was telling me how her son-in-law was, this past winter was very discouraged. And it does no good to retention in this market of labor shortage for people to quit their jobs, these essential jobs, because social media can be vicious. And I want to take the side of our staff as well and not tolerate some of these unwarranted complaints that we get. So this past winter, when people did have complaints on especially on social media, I actually took a drive out there sometimes within half an hour and just took pictures. And I said, actually, what are you talking about? Politely, so that our staff doesn't, or our contractors aren't, unfairly targeted. So, yeah. And then, in general, in the community meetings that we've had so far, thank you, Sherry, for organizing and actually also being there physically as well. There were some questions that, recurring questions that, people tend to ask the same question until they get the answer they want. So it's important to have people with the background history of, things. So thank you, Sherry. And yeah, just a recurring theme of the community meetings. I mentioned at a few meetings that, when I come to the board of directors meetings and I see, the whole area, the big picture, Cache Creek and what's happening there. Area A is quite, fortunate. We don't have such emergencies going on. So it's good to politely remind people that we live in the region of BC's best. And then some First Nation. So I mentioned to them we have a board meeting in Blue River in August. So I'm waiting to hear back from them on suggested places to stop and perhaps have a meeting with them as well, since we're having a meeting on their traditional territory. So yeah. And then I also reached out to them about, and this is thanks to Trisha, noticing me talking to myself in the hallway like a madman. And because I was just wondering, how the heck, I've talked to a lot of contractors locally in Clearwater, and we know there's a fire hazard in the Wellsgrave Park, actually quite a big one. One road in and out, and all the tourists and residents living in the area. But contractors have told me that in the past, whenever they asked parks for permission to go in there and thin some of those brush, they've been denied because for all sorts of reasons. Trisha, you mentioned, have you engaged your First Nation partners? Because typically they might have an easier going at getting permits. So I said, no, I haven't. And I talked to them, and coincidentally, they were already in the process of getting permits to do exactly that, thinning out some of the brushes and stuff with their Indigenous initial attack crews. So hopefully we'll get some good news coming up this summer. And that's about it.
Thank you. Director Thorpe.
Okay, as everybody knows, we had the floods over near Cache Creek. So thank you to Jamie and Kevin and to Scott, because I asked them a million questions and probably drove them crazy. But I really appreciate it because it's horrible as it sounds. It's my first flood. We had a fire up Botany the other day. Botany Valley, there was a vehicle went off the road and caught fire. Luckily, everybody managed, the neighbors pulled together, and then Lytton First Nations and the village of Lytton crew managed to get up there and get it out before there was any substantial damage. Luckily, it was May and not July or August, because it could have been a whole different scenario. So I think that brings us to fire brigades and trying to find a workaround for funding and interesting sources of how we might be able to help communities without getting into any kind of legalities. Is that the word I want? But, common sense approach to that. Highway 8 in August of last year, they suffered a mudslide, likely as a result of the fires from 21. And there was, they were told there was no funding available for them. Luckily, that has been changed due to some advocacy and some work with some of the ranchers that are pretty stubborn up there. And there was $400,000 that is going to help them clear up the debris from that mudslide. So that was a real win. Let me see, Highway 1 construction is starting this summer through the corridor there. They're going to be starting with Falls Creek. They've already set up a bunch of the trailers. And the first phase is going to be doing some fill. And then they are going to look at setting up a 2-lane bridge. Once they've got that 2-lane bridge in, then they're going to kind of slide it over closer to the rock face, and they're hoping to put a 3rd lane in there. So they're kind of keeping me up to date on that. It is going to cause some delays. With that, I've been talking to the provincial economic development fellow here in town, because we were trying to figure out how to work around some of the financial impacts that may hit some of the small businesses along the corridor that have already had problems because of the fires and the floods. And now we've got traffic stops and people, tourism that they would normally have, they're in a hurry once they get through all of that construction. So that's an ongoing issue I'm working with. TNRD, people impacted by the 21 wildfire in the Lytton area are now included in the funding that was made available by Minister Sejan last June 15th. Initially, it was village only, but that has since been advocated that they will be included in the piece around the residential rebuilds and around the 7.2 for businesses. They're still not clear how the 7.2 is going to roll out. They're working on the residential first. 7.2, I'm hoping a lot more of it will be grants than loans. But again, that's a work in progress. Let me see. Hat Creek Historic Ranch, Bonaparte First Nations, and 16 Mile Residents, TNRD. We had a meeting with Jamie. We're kind of in an exploratory stage of looking at maybe doing a collaborative approach to see if we could put a fire hall in. And it may be that Bonaparte is looking at putting one in on IR1, and maybe we can piggyback and use services. Don't know how it's going to look yet. It's very preliminary. Citizen of the Year awards. I went there. We're done a week ago today. And I'm happy to say that Christine Walkham, Chief of Cooks Ferry, was named Citizen of the Year for Area I. She's very deserving of that award. She was amazing during the fires and the floods, and she held everybody together. And it didn't matter if they were TNRD, if they were Cooks Ferry, who they were. She pulled everybody forward, and she's very deserving of that award. Let me see. Spence's Bridge, the old schoolhouse there, that roof upgrade should be starting the first week of June, as that's an $80,000 project. Hopefully that will go quickly and efficiently with no major surprises. Fire Smart. The village of Lytton and Lytton First Nations has Tecumseh Fire Smart. And I joined it before I became part of the TNRD. And they have been working on fire smarting and doing a lot of education. We're looking at a $400,000 fire smart project over the next 2 years that would see hiring, I think it's 4 people for 6 months at a time to kind of mitigate around the village, around LFN, just to try and keep fire down. They're working on the what is it called? We're doing the residential fire assessments. I'm actually helping Kathy Herbertson, who you probably know. She and I are going to be going through what's left of the village of Lytton up Loring Way next week and doing those assessments. I think 16 Mile, working on a speed reduction there. They're trying to get a 70-mile speed limit in that corridor because there's a lot of roadways that go off of there and people zip through there, and it's a bit of a hazard. So that's something else we're working on. And I think that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hooton.
Well, we'll start east of town at Del Oro, which is kind of a unique situation because it's right a community among itself. on the doorstep of the city of Kamloops, and of course, they've got one of those great water systems that the TNRD inherited, and lack of water and boil advisory like most of them. So we've talked about how we can remedy that, but there's only 42 residences, I think. So it's one of the smaller ones. So, I'm going to try and get the frontage road and all that paved. I've been talking to Argo, and they're working on a project where they're going to pave east of town. It was just announced yesterday. Ministry of Highways is going from Valley View, I believe, to Kokanee Way. And they're going to try and get some material and fix up that rough frontage road in Del Oro. So help them a bit that way, and then cross the tracks on the other side, work on Keekwelly Park, maybe with the residents, and to see what we can do there to spruce that up. Further east of town to Pritchard, I know they've got an application in pending. They want to do some work on their community hall. Like one of those we discussed before, these community halls, but I think Pritchard is one of the better ones, and we'll try and help them out in that. Across the river, really want to work with Director Morris and TNRD and the provincial government and I haven't attended exactly where it is yet, but Lee's going to take me there. Is the Pritchard Beach issue, which is a consortium of garbage, drug dealers, and everything else that goes with it on a public piece of crown land underneath a bridge. And so hopefully Director Morris and I and TNRD and the Crown can get together and have a remedy. Up the road at Westwold, of course, we had the recent flooding, attended a few things out there. There's been talk of possibly looking at a community fire hall. Jamie and I have talked about that in the fire department here. I think that's a project in its works. Back down the hill in Monty Creek, of course, we're waiting on the ALR designation for the community fire hall. I put a bug in the ear of the ALR and sort of said, get her done, boys, but we got to watch doing that too. So anyhow, I don't know where we're at on that. And if you notice right on the triangle by Hook Road, there's a lot of activity with cats and scrapers, and I think that little piece was zoned for commercial card lock, and I'm hoping it's the site of the new federated co-op card lock that they've been wanting to put in this area. You'll notice that most of the Husky gas stations have turned over to federated co-op, and they're out of Regina. And they wanted to put that card lock in at Kokanee Way, but the residents there said no. But I think the co-op is putting in a gas station, a car wash right by the new Southern Irrigation building and right across from where I used to work at Prairie Coast. Up the hill in Knutsford, nothing really, mad and exciting there. I took on the role when I took this job here to try and communicate with Argo Road Maintenance. My alternate, Andrea Van Eiderson's husband, is the general manager of Argo for the region. And he's been really good at just on a text basis on trying to help the residents, especially like you mentioned earlier, Jamie, they move from the Vancouver into Jackson Road. There's 3 houses, and why isn't my road plowed? And when you get 3 feet of snow, well, kind of explain to him, you're kind of at the bottom of the totem pole, but we'll get there one day. And Argo's always been good at doing that. So I think I've covered most of the areas. Like I said, Pritchard Rodeo is coming up in July. I helped them out a little bit there. I made an opportunity and some of my discretionary funds. I made a trip up to Turtle Valley and presented a check the other day to the Turtle Valley Donkey Refuge, and it's a really neat little outfit. I kind of watch some of these hoarders of the world, and some I agree with, and some are pretty darn good. And I think that's one of the darn good ones. So Purity Feed had a weed field day there last year I attended, and so I helped them out a bit there. I think that covers most of the area. I know we've talked about the Knutsford transfer station, adding a couple of commodities that wooden material and pallets. And I think that would help the area out and, small, do a bunch of small things for a bunch of different communities instead of some mega projects and I think our area is in pretty darn good shape. So leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Hayward?
I don't know, you guys are a hard act to follow. I have to invent something to say, no. I think what I started when I first came into this, I was like a deer in the headlights, like, but after a couple of meetings, I feel really comfortable with it. I think the staff here are amazing. I love working with you, and I think the electoral directors and the board of directors in a whole have been tremendous as far as helping, and the knowledge is wonderful. And we problem solve together, which I think is so important. Because if you're not a team, you're nothing really in my eye. So I've worked a lot with people within my area, just getting to know them, to talk to them, to listen to what their problems might be. I've done a lot of advocating for people to start mitigating for the possibility of wildfire, because I think for where we are, we're more wildfire than flood, although we can have floods too. We've had them. Just letting them know what their options are and trying to get them pre-prepared. I've done a lot of livestock advocating as far as how to get your livestock out, where to go, what to do. And I've also, passed along the numbers and all of those important things. Big advocate for fixing our highway and making sure that we are not killing people every step of the way on it. It's getting better, but it's still crazy. But we're getting there. I've also worked closely with just our local service groups like Argo and stuff like that on some things that we've needed. Been called out a number of times to people that are concerned because they live in a small subdivision and they have one road into a very heavily treated subdivision and no way out. And that's a great concern, but it is what it is. Carry the wire cutters in your pocket, and it's just, I don't know what to say, but the staff has been good on that too. So those are things that I've done in just advocating with the people. One thing I'm really excited about, and I know about this because I'm part of the Fall Fair organization, but we have the Canadian National Sheep Breeders Show and Sale for all of Canada coming to Barrier in July 8th weekend. Last time we did this was in 2009, and we had sheep from every province in Canada except two, and that was New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. But we had sheep come from PEI, and Quebec. It was just amazing. And what they do is they bring the sheep, they show them, and then they auction them off in the sale. So all of those sheep are sold to our province, or our sheep that are in the sale go back to the other provinces. And it's a great way of, changing the lineage and so on. It's a very prestigious event. So it's coming to the TNRD area, which is great. And the regional rabbit show, which may sound kind of crazy, but they're having a provincial regional rabbit show in Barrier this year, which is a big thing because they're hoping to make that the heart of the rabbit show. So yes, Joseph can have his rabbit show. So again, that's a very prestigious something coming. So all of these things are really good for generating income and helping our people to get back on their feet after COVID. And the rabbit show, which is amazing, has filled all of the hotels already. They're all booked up in Barrier, which is like, okay, good for the bunnies. And I don't want to keep you here too long. So mostly, I think that what I have done so far is just really talk to the people and found out where they're at, what they want. I haven't come across any major huge hoops. We're trying to fix some roads. We're trying to do some things that we can't do, but because the TNRD can't do it, I'm trying to help people to find ways that they can, advocating for them. Really proud of what Little Fort Community Hall and what's been done at Little Fort. And of course, June the 4th is a big opening there. And that's me in a nutshell right now, but I'm sure there's going to be some wonderful things come forward when we can get my money out there, right? I just have to find the right project. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let's see, thanks to Joey and James, Jamie and Joe's presentations. Area N has been well covered. Their updates are all covered, and I have nothing more to add, so thank you so much.
Okay, I've got a few things. One thing I think is very important that we do as directors is make arrangements with the staff to come and have a community meeting. Basically, I talked to Jamie and I gave him the information that we wanted to talk about in Lower Nicola. And we've set up a time to go and do that. We haven't been able to do this for a long time, and I think it's important that you invite, obviously staff has to be down there with you, but you take the opportunity to invite your community down and talk about things that are important that we haven't touched on for a long time. That was a key event that we've arranged. And Herb and I would just keep finding projects to support and work with the community on all different aspects of how we can spend our discretionary funds or community building funds. There's always something you can look at and support your community with. With that, thank you. I guess we're adjourned unless there's something else.
Oh yeah, I forgot. Falkland Stampedes this weekend. It's on the doorstep of the TNRD. I'm gonna make an appearance. Haven't done it for a few years. A lot of people from this area go there, so it's one of the major events in the area. You look at our rodeos and stampedes, we got years coming up, Jill, in the fall, and get out and see the great things in our district. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I think we're adjourned. Thank you very much. It was a formative time.